So here.
I don't know any of you, but it's nice to see familiar faces. Hi.
Yeah, there's quite a few of you that have done multiple of my courses this winter. All right. So, welcome back. I don't think I've got anybody new for the contour drawing class specifically. So as I think you all know already, well, this is me. I won't bother going through that in detail. But we've got a four evening class here. So this is where we really get into some of the meat of map making. And I've added a little bit of information here last minute, a couple slides about the concept of process versus practice. And I wanted to touch on this before we start, because I noticed in the responses to the questionnaire, there was a couple of you that were saying what you wanted to get out of the course was a process, kind of, or the steps to drawing contours. And the bad news is that's not really possible. As I was kind of mentioning in response to Eric's question there a couple of minutes ago, a lot of this is more kind of open-ended and kind of how do you approach the problem solving and the thinking aspect of this. So if you kind of compare, there's a process versus a practice. A process is a set of steps, a set of an ordered set of actions that you can take. You can follow through. You can take your process, you write it down, you hand it off to somebody, and they can follow that process and they can generate a reliable outcome. Versus the concept of a practice being, well, I'll read the definition here. The actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method, as opposed to theories relating to it. So that particular definition is relating it to kind of the theoretical versus the practical. But the idea here being that it is the use of an idea, belief, or method, a little bit more open-ended. And it's more about your practice of following through on that. So if we look at that, practices tend to be more open-ended. They tend to be more flexible, right? As opposed to that specific set of processes. You have your input, you're going to get a reliable output. Part of the thing is that the input is so variable depending on the terrain, right? And so you need a more flexible process for how to deal with that. It's more experience-based, and there tends to be more of a requirement to understand kind of why we're doing what we're doing and what we're doing, right? So to talk about, practicing law, it's not a process, but it's a more broader practice, right? I've studied for this. This is how I figure out what I'm doing, and I know how to kind of respond and react to what I'm working with, right? So, so when it comes to contour drawing in particular, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that practice of drawing contours, as opposed to a set of steps that can be broken down into concrete instructions that you guys can follow. So that's why we're working on this over, I guess it's a total of 12 hours, as opposed to a 2.5 hour evening on drawing contours, right? So again, the goal is to teach you guys how to think, to help you learn how to think, as opposed to giving you guys a series of steps that you can follow. Take this LiDAR data, draw the line here. Well, that's not all that helpful, because the terrain here in Gatineau Park versus the terrain in Wyoming versus the terrain in Arizona is all so different. And you need to learn how to think about what you're seeing and translate the data that you're working with as your starting point into the map that you're trying to create, right? So I wanted to put that in up front so that everybody's kind of clear on what the goal is here with this class and how to think about what you're trying to learn and get out of this. So this contour drawing class builds a bit on the LiDAR class, the 2 days of LiDAR that we did the last couple of weeks. We will come back to that, not as much today. Today we're going to focus on some, I don't want to say theoretical, a little bit theoretical, I guess, but some discussion at a high level of kind of an introduction to contours, what they are, what they show, some of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to spend probably close to 2 out of the 3 hours just going hands-on and practicing drawing with the Bezier curve tool. That takes a lot of practice to really gain experience enough that you can confidently draw your Bezier curves every time the way you want. And I've got a number of exercises that I put up in that Google Drive folder on the Bezier curves. We have 3 hours tonight. I'm going to switch. I don't have a set order to do this in, but I'm going to switch a little bit back and forth just to break it up so that it's not all PowerPoint presentation, me talking with some questions and interaction, and then 2 straight hours of drawing. But we'll kind of flip back and forth. And there's not going to be much kind of segue back and forth in between. They're 2 kind of different topics, but they're both foundational in different ways. But just to break it up, we'll be jumping back and forth today. And then next week, we'll look at reading LiDAR contours. So we're going to take what we did over the last couple of weeks. For those of you, I think everybody did that course. And we'll look at then drawing your orienteering contours from that LiDAR base material, the LiDAR contours. So that hopefully, I did touch on it a little bit last week, but hopefully after today, it's going to make a little bit more sense why we're doing that and what the difference between the LiDAR contours and the orienteering contours, quote unquote, is. And then we'll move on to going into more detail, interpreting the various LiDAR output, and continue with more practice drawing contours with some of the LiDAR input, and some of the other things you can get out of that. So you can read the LiDAR input, you can get the contour or the contours, obviously, but you can also get, some information about ponds. You can sometimes see trails, walls, buildings, that kind of stuff, cliffs, certainly in the LiDAR data. And we'll start to get into kind of drawing those together so that the contours play well with some of the other detail that you're adding into the map there. And then finally, we will look at contours and how, going into a lot more detail here, and how the contours interact with other features. So cliffs, streams, ponds, trails, and how they interact, how they play off of each other to draw a map that is going to make the most sense, the most legible to read, and ultimately give the best experience for the folks running on the map, right? And we'll also talk about contours and sprint maps. There's some differences. So with a forest orienteering map, typically for most of the map, I would draw the contours first from the desk, from the LiDAR, and then go in and fill in everything else through, well, more drawing from LiDAR for some of the features, but also with fieldwork. In sprint maps, I always draw the contours last. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just briefly, the difference is that in contours, in sprint maps, the contours are typically not what you're reading to make decisions about your route choices or in terms of your navigation. You tend to be looking for buildings, pavement type stuff, what the runnability is. Either they tend to be pretty flat, or the elevation is not typically a deciding factor. It's more the length of the route and number of corners and that kind of thing. Whereas when you're in the forest, the contours, at least at an advanced level, the contours are one of the prime things, if not the number one thing, that you're going to be navigating off of. And so drawing what you're going to be navigating off of first, drawing that stuff first is going to prioritize the right things to make the map as intuitive as possible for the folks using it, right? So anyway, that's a summary of kind of the 4 days. For today, I'm going to start off with actually some discussion. So I'm going to split the groups into, let's go into 3 groups here. So I'm going to try the breakout rooms. If I've got that, I think I have that set up to do that. And the first piece of this exercise is going to be to come up with kind of a formal definition. And I don't mean strictly in an orienteering sense, but what is kind of a strict definition of a contour or a contour line and a contour interval. So I'm just going to stop sharing. And we have this option here. Okay, so I didn't have a chance to test this beforehand, and I don't see the option to set up breakout rooms. So let's just do this as a large discussion here. And yeah, what do you guys think of in terms of coming up with some kind of definition for start with a contour line or contour?
I always talk about it when I'm talking to people. It's like it's a line of constant elevation on any given on a flat map surface.
Anything else?
And I guess beyond that, they're spaced equally apart.
Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, that's getting to that second point of the contour interval, right? But it's a constant vertical, they're vertically spaced equally apart, right?
They show the shape of the terrain.
So yes, in some senses, yes. And we'll get to what I mean by in some senses later. So Eric, I think you kind of nailed it right off the bat. I don't know if there's a whole lot more discussion to be had, but any other thoughts before we flip to where I've got the formal definitions written down? All right. So let me pull my my screen back up here. So these are taken from Wikipedia, these definitions here. In cartography, a contour line, or just a contour, joins points of equal elevation above a given level, such as mean sea level. So yes, it's a line of constant elevation, constant height on the map. The contour interval is the difference in elevation between your contour lines. And apologies, I don't recall who said it. That typically that contour interval is constant on a map. I don't know if I can't think of a specific situation where it would make sense to not have a constant contour interval. But at the same time, I don't think there's any strict reason why they have to be, other than the fact that it would be a very confusing map if there was different contour intervals across the map.
It's actually pretty common in adventure racing. Maps get stitched together,
Right.
and they're all based on USGS maps, or in Thailand it's Thai Geographic Survey, whatever. But you stitch them all together, and one of them's done with a 20-foot contour interval, and the other one's done with a 5-foot contour interval.
Sure, because you're working with a bit of a Franken map, but
yeah.
But if you were designing a map from scratch, I don't quite
Yeah.
see where that would make sense to do that, right? So the next step of this is to these two questions. I want you guys to take a minute, maybe a couple minutes, and think about how you would answer these two questions. And I'm talking in terms of contours and kind of landform terrain, what the contours represent in these two questions. And so ignore, I'm not talking about ponds, streets, other stuff on the map. I'm talking about all the brown stuff on the orienteering map. When you look at the map, what do you see? And when you look at when you're in the forest looking at the terrain, what comes to mind when you picture that?
Are you talking about like hills and valleys?
So yes, those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for.
I mean, when I look at a map, very literally, I see how closely spaced or not contours are. There, you know, how steep a particular part of the terrain is, or
Yep.
or flat a part of it.
So partly you're using the map to, somebody else has drawn the map with the features and you're on the map, you're trying to figure out where to go. And so you're trying to associate the features you're seeing on the map with what you're seeing in real life to be able to navigate around.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I'm getting at, but
For me, the question has brought up something that's interesting for me. Like when I see a map with contour lines, the first things I pick out are the high spots.
Okay.
And in particular, connecting high spots to develop, like, oh, there's a ridge system, and oh, there's a connecting ridge system. And that's the thing I see first on the map.
Yeah.
Whereas on the ground, the first things I see are all the reentrance and stream beds and all the sort of low spots.
right.
For reasons I hadn't thought about before, mostly because you can't see the ridge tops often.
Yeah.
Maybe the density of contours, like a particular area, not just how close they are together, but if there's a lot in a particular area, there could be like a spaghetti of contours versus, you know, that might be a field that has very few contours.
Mm.
I think there's probably another part, which is when you look at the map initially and you see a curve, a parabola, I don't know if it's a spur or reentrant, right? It takes further studying in most cases to figure out what I'm actually looking at.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. I always know exactly what they are when I see them.
I need to start running things with you then. Save me some embarrassment.
Certainly not the first thing I see as a competitor, but when I start to see adjacent contour lines doing different things and not tracking together, that's telling me something.
Okay. Yeah. For sure.
When I look at a map, usually I'm looking for the big stuff. So like, unless I'm doing like a micro navigation into a control, I'm looking for big hills, big spurs, reentrance.
Yeah.
And that's a really good one because it depends to me a lot of what kind of terrain you're in, right? Down in the Southwest right now, you can see a mile, basically all the detail if you're up high versus if you're buried in a forest where seeing that hook on the spur is really useful, but I can't tell you what's 300 meters away.
Yeah.
So kind of the level of detail you can get out of your visual compared to the map in any given setting.
Yeah. Let's move on to focusing. We're talking more about reading on the map. So if you picture yourself kind of standing in the woods, and this can be whatever the woods are, what are you seeing? Somebody had mentioned kind of hills and valleys. What else do you picture yourself kind of seeing? If you're just standing there and you're looking around not without a map, what do you see about the topography?
The flow of water defines everything.
Okay.
Right, it's the reason for every reentrant and such.
Yeah.
I think something I do more from years of running around on orienteering maps or maps with contour lines is I tend to look at like, okay, what's the path of least resistance? Like how do I stay on the same contour for a little while here? You know,
Right.
rather than going down and losing elevation or going up and
Yeah.
losing my heart rate.
I generally look for high points in the terrain, like positive topography, and that's unless, I mean, depends a lot of what the terrain is, but
Yeah.
usually I'm looking for hills and spurs.
All right. It's interesting. Your answers are all absolutely perfectly valid. The maybe I didn't word the question to get the answers that I was looking for. So which is totally fair enough. If I'm standing in the terrain, I'm seeing features. I'm seeing hills. I'm seeing reentrance and maybe shapes of reentrance. I'm maybe seeing the slopes. I see if I'm standing somewhere, fairly flat and I've got a big hill in front of me, I see where it changes kind of from flat to the big steep hill, and I might see the top of it as well, right? So I'm seeing the I guess getting back to what I have heard from you guys a bunch, I'm seeing kind of the high stuff. Maybe in certain terrain, yeah, I'm seeing the big reentrance. Depends a lot on the terrain. So that's the kind of stuff that I see. Right. I'm seeing some of those big slopes. I'm seeing the hilltops. I'm seeing a reentrant. I'm seeing a shape of something, all of that kind of stuff, right? Which is not totally different from what you're saying, but it's just yeah, maybe a slightly different way of answering that, right? And my point with all of this is that the answers that we gave that you guys gave and that we put up on this slide here is very different than that kind of formal definition of what a contour is and a contour interval is, right? Nobody in this discussion about what we see in maps and terrain was, hey, I see where that equal elevation is, right? The idea of how close contours are, and looking for kind of how much brown there is, came up. I think it was Eric mentioned kind of the finding that path of least resistance, i.e. staying on level, which is in that specific case, that is that contour. And there was a bit of a hint as to the contour interval. But generally speaking, that's not what we're seeing when we're in the terrain, right? And so this is where the difference between those LiDAR contours and how you're drawing the contours to be intuitive to what the orienteer sees. And that's why we're doing that hand drawing, because we're trying to draw contours that are going to be intuitive to folks to see, and that is not necessarily what the LiDAR is providing. Right? So we're gonna, I mean, that's a lot of what we're gonna cover over the, not so much tonight, but certainly over the next few weeks. We're gonna be talking a lot about that and about taking your LiDAR as your source of data, but then departing from that to think like an orienteer, and how do I draw this in a way that is going to make the most intuitive sense to the person trying to navigate on this map, so that I'm representing those features, those shapes, and even if that means that they're not quite on that 5 meter line, they're not quite level, it's going to be of more use to the person going around the orienteering course, right? So, questions, comments on that? We're talking very high level here, but I want to give some context for why we're doing a lot of the work that we're doing, because it is a lot of work to hand draw your contours versus just using what the LiDAR provides. But there's a reason for it. So again, sticking with some of the abstract stuff here for just a little bit longer. What it is that we're trying to show. So how are the maps used for navigation? So there's 3 components to navigation, broadly speaking. You can divide it up in different ways and in different numbers of kind of components. But broadly speaking, I'm going to divide it up into 3 here. The first being for route choice. There we go. And so you want a map that allows you to compare runnability, climb, and distance. The key thing here is that your map is consistent. That what is light green on the north end of the map is the same as what's light green on the south end of the map, so that I can make those decisions with some confidence that I can compare the map in different parts of the map, that everything is well represented in terms of how much it's going to slow you down, how much climb it's providing, and then of course distance as well, though I think that goes without saying, considering how maps are designed. Secondly, there's the planning aspect. So if your route choice, I would say, is kind of, am I going left around the pond or am I going right around the pond? Planning is, think of it as, what are the steps that I can follow, that if I were to say, okay, here's the steps, and I told you what the steps are, that somebody could kind of follow those steps to actually get from control 1 to control 2. Whereas if I just said, okay, I went left, that's not enough to give that to somebody else and have them read the map and figure out how to get there, right? So the planning, determining what the major features are that you can rely on. And Robbie, you had talked about looking for the kind of the biggest things as part of your navigation, and that's kind of ties into this planning thing, right? So I don't necessarily need to read all of the little details along the way, but I need to know that I'm going to take a compass bearing to this pond, and then I'm going to look for the reentrant, and then I'm going to look for that next thing, and what are the big things, and they're going along the way. And then once you come up with that plan, what those big steps are, you need to execute on that plan. And I'm throwing a new term at folks, which is zoom map reading. But basically, it is that kind of precision orienteering, that detailed map reading, that when you're like looking for the control, or there's a really detailed section, you need to kind of read a lot of detail there. That's what we're talking about here, right? So it's visualizing the terrain based on that map, and vice versa. Seeing the terrain and then matching it on the map sometimes is really important as well. Knowing where you are, knowing where you're going, finding controls where that comes into play, right? And so your map needs to show the details relative to each other to allow you to do that zoom map reading. It needs to show the big features for the planning, and it all needs to be done consistently to give you that route choice, right? So those are kind of the big picture of what are kind of the goals of your map. It should allow orienteers to consistently and effectively do all 3 of these things. So particularly at one end of the spectrum, there's the route choice. You don't necessarily need all your detail on your map to allow an orienteer to make their route choice. You just need to see the big picture of things. So it's important to capture that big picture on your map, but it's also important to capture the detail so that when they're going in and finding that control and they need to utilize that zoom map reading, quote unquote, the map can support that element of navigation as well, right? And then the planning kind of falls in between. You need the bigger features, you need some of the smaller stuff as well, and you need to see how it fits together, pick out what's important and what's not, right? And so I don't want to say the balance of those two aspects of map reading, because it's not that it's not fully a trade-off, but you do need to try to capture the big picture stuff as well as figuring out how to get enough of the detail. So that's true overall in creating an orienteering map, but when we're drawing contours, we need to keep that in mind as well, that we're trying to capture the big picture of the terrain. Where are the big slopes, the big hills? How do we capture that? And then how do we make sure that we're capturing the right level of detail for that, to enable that good execution and that good that kind of zoom map reading, quote unquote, there.
What stands out to me in this description that you just provided, Jeff, is that when we're making the map, we aren't necessarily thinking about where controls are going, really. Obviously, there are some things that might just stand out as like, this is a perfect place for a control. But like this idea of like trying to make it detailed enough in the vicinity of controls kind of becomes a bit of a challenge, like if you don't know exactly where the controls are going. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of newer mappers do often think about, oh, this would be a good control location, so I should therefore put it on the map. Well, that's not your job to decide where the controls are going, first of all, right? That is somebody else's job. And the controls should be placed on features that are well represented on the map. And it's putting the cart before the horse, right? And a lot of folks will say, oh, well, I got to add all this detail because no, if the terrain is bland, the terrain is bland, right? Like to a certain extent, yes. In certain areas, yes, I will push the limits and I'll put smaller rocks on the map and versus in other terrain. But not to the point where I'm going to, really stretch the imagination and try to put on a 40 centimeter rock on the map when I'm looking behind and I see a big hill behind. Well, that's adding detail that the orienteer, if they're kind of running through the terrain, they don't need to see that little rock, right? Even if there aren't other rocks around, it's not adding anything useful because I'm seeing bigger picture and I can know exactly where I am relative to the hills around me without that rock being on the map. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't want to get too caught up in this. And we'll come back to this. Let's pause here because we're at over half an hour, and let's get into some of the practical stuff, and give you guys a chance to practice drawing those Bezier curves. So, I guess I don't actually want to stop sharing. Let's do this again. What I want is this guy here. And we're going to look at let's go with the Gould Lake tracing exercise. So this is a map that's between Kingston and Ottawa, for those of you that are familiar enough with Eastern Ontario. That I had done a base map for this a number of years ago. My good friend Eric Kemp has done a lot of recent work on it. And he very kindly allowed me to use this as an example here. A lot of my contour drawing, I have learned from Eric / in conjunction with Eric. Eric and I have a great partnership when it comes to mapping, that most of our projects will kind of review each other's work, give each other feedback. sometimes at the end, sometimes partway through. I've certainly learned a lot from him, and I suspect he would say the same about our partnership. And what I've done here is I've taken a section of the map, and just I've hidden everything but the contour information, and the point knolls and that kind of stuff. And through a lot of screen capture and then stitching it all back together, I have created a base map layer that shows the points and handles of the Bezier curves that Eric has drawn for all of his contour lines. So the squares, and in a few cases the diamonds, squares rotated to 45 degrees, are the points. So that's where you want to be clicking, and then the little round handles there are show the direction, and based on how far out they're pulled, they pull the curve further. So this whole section here is a few hours of work drawing all of this section of map, all these contours. So we certainly will not get through all of it. But I've created this exercise so that you guys can practice tracing these and just getting it to match with that feedback from that base layer, to get you started. I've got another one, which, depending on how much we can kind of spend most of our time on this one, or we can split it between our two examples. And then we've also got a couple of exercises without the tags showing that we'll go through as well. And so this is mostly about giving you guys a chance to practice this, because you're going to get frustrated without having at least some of this skill of drawing these curves in the next couple of weeks, if you don't have at least a basic handle on how to draw these Bezier curves. So for this, you can start anywhere. I'm gonna pick a corner. You guys can follow along, and with what I'm doing, you guys can take the next. Let's start with saying we'll start with 20 minutes, and then we'll check in. And you guys can just have at if you want, or you can try to do what I'm doing, or you can just listen to me as I go through for at least the first 10 minutes or so.
Can you go through the steps to get that into Orienteering Mapper? I didn't know which one you got, and I didn't.
Oh,
realize
yes,
you did them all
absolutely,
over.
Ralph. So if you've downloaded the files from Google Drive, they're all in the day one exercises.
Yeah.
If you extract that, you're going to look for the one that is called Gould Lake Tracing Exercise.omap.
Gould Lake Tracing. I got Gould Lake Tracing Exercise, full background, Gould Lake. Points and
Not the full
handles.
background one, just the.
Jeb.
Yeah.
I did that, but I just have an outline of the region. I don't see
Okay.
the points.
So yeah, so once you open that up,
How do we get it in there? What
Yeah.
yeah. So you're gonna go in, click on this little kind of sandwich icon, if you want to think of it that way. The flat sheets here, or you can hit F9 on your keyboard as a shortcut, and that's opens up this template window in the bottom right.
Oh, wait, you're ahead of me here. I'm only on.
Okay.
Do I open a map? Is that the first?
So you're gonna open up that Gould Lake Tracing Exercise.omap file in Open Orienteering Mapper.
Yeah. How do I get it in there though?
Are you in Open Orienteering Mapper now, Ralph?
Yeah, I'm in there.
So you're gonna if you hit open,
Yeah.
right, and then you're gonna open your file.
Okay, I gotta find it first now. I didn't realize you wanted it all uploaded here already. So.
Another way I did it was you go to templates and it drops down and you click open template.
Yeah.
And then you put it in that way, if that's easier.
Yeah, and so the idea here is that you probably have you'll have a check mark here beside hide all templates. And if you uncheck that, it will show the contour layer that you're seeing on my map here with the Bezier curve tags.
Okay, so I got two Gould Lake map. One training exercise, one full background.
Yeah, so you don't want to open the one that's titled full background, because that's a template layer that you can
Just the
that you can
tracing.
load in. So just the tracing exercise, and then you want to open up that template.
Okay.
Go in the
so
bottom
that's
right.
it there. Okay. Okay, I got it in there now.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So I know some of you, well, maybe you've already started, and if that's the case, then that's totally fine. Some of you, this is still fairly new. You're you know, only been working with this for a couple of weeks since taking some of these courses. So I'll go through a bit of a reminder here. You're going to select your contour or your form line in the window on the right where you have the different symbols. And then you're going to use this draw paths tool, the S. And then let's say we're going to draw this, start with this hill here. So I can zoom in to whatever level I feel I need to zoom in at. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag. So press the mouse down, hold it down, and drag the mouse in the direction that I want to draw my curve. And then basically at each of these squares, I'm going to click and drag and release. And I'm going to do that. The drag is kind of along the direction of the handles of the blue handles with the circles at the end. And then when I get to my last one, in this case, I can just hit enter and it's going to close that up. Give everybody a chance.
Jeff, did you have to click the one you started on again before you hit enter, or?
No,
Okay.
you do not. So the enter key will automatically close the loop from the last one that you did to the first one that you did. Okay. And then you may notice here that my my tags, if I hover over them, then I get them popping up in orange here. And these, like this orange tag, the handles are not as far out. They're not as long as the ones that I have on my background. So I can drag those out to line them up. And that should, if I can get all of those lined up the way I want, then that's going to should give me the exact same shape as what Eric had drawn in the map there. See, and now my brown line lines up exactly with what Eric had drawn. Does that process make sense?
So you're saying that the brown that we see under the blue is something that Eric drew,
Yes.
and that the blue are points you've put on as an exercise for us to join up to then create the circle.
But yeah, yes, essentially, yeah. They're what I drew on, except they are the points that Eric drew. And I'm just showing them so that you can trace it exactly and get comfortable with kind of so you can play around with how these tags, moving these tags, how it changes the shape, right? I pull this out and it pulls this curve out. I shorten that and it gives me a different curve, right?
It didn't work when I went to the template thing suggestion. I still don't see the points on my map.
So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to get you to share your screen.
Yeah, I can't share my screen.
Hey,
But
never mind.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's all right.
I'm using two different computers.
Right.
One,
which I did suggest to folks. So so that's the downside of that approach. But So what do you see what I see with in my template window in the bottom right?
If you wouldn't mind sharing that, I'll have a
Oh, yeah,
look.
I stopped sharing so that you could share, and then you didn't.
Yeah. I just have two lines. One's called map
Yeah.
and one's called lake tracing. Yeah, I don't have that detail there. Maybe I uploaded the wrong map then. Maybe that's it.
Maybe maybe you opened the wrong file. Maybe you opened the tracing exercise full background potentially.
No, okay. I'll play around with opening the different ones then.
Okay.
So the Gould Lake tracing, yeah, mine says Gould Lake. Oh, I don't. Okay.
This is what your file should be called in the top left of my screen here.
Yeah.
Gould Lake tracing exercise.omap is what you should see in the top left.
Yeah, I have that, but that's coming up. I've got different file names under in the template. So do you have two
Interesting.
files?
Okay, let me see.
Should I upload the full background map?
Yeah, the problem is that you're gonna have to align it because of the way I did it as screenshots, it's not gonna pop into place. The background isn't geo-referenced.
Okay.
So
I'll it's all good. I'll for the sake of the evening, I'm just gonna play around and figure it out myself. And
Okay.
if I don't, that's okay. I'll look at what you guys are doing on the screen.
For my computer setup, in order to get it to pull up, I need to download both the Gould tracing exercise map and the background map. And then you go into Open Mapper and open just the exercise map, and it'll auto-populate that background map.
Oh, thank you. I'll try that then.
yes, if you haven't downloaded, sorry, yes, you have to have downloaded all of those files. It's not gonna work if the other files are still just in Google Drive.
So that's all, like, okay, go over that again. Do we want for the remainder of the course, do we want all the ArcL, Gould,
Yes,
Kokanee
you want
files?
all of the files that are in that folder in Google
Yeah.
Drive. You want them all downloaded and placed in the same folder as each other. You can place them wherever you want on your computer, but they all need to be in the same folder. And then it should hopefully work the way I'm expecting it to.
Can I open them as a group, or do I have, it looks like I can't open as a group. I gotta do it one by one?
To download them,
Yeah,
you should be able to download them, and then it will put them into a zip folder, and then you'll need to extract the various files from the zip folder.
yeah, I've done that, but how do I'm talking about getting them into OMAP. Do I have to do it one by one? It looks like I can only do it one by one.
Yes, you'll open, in this case, just open the Gould Lake tracing exercise file. And then when we try another file, you'll open that separately.
Okay, I'm still not getting, like, the discussion just a second ago was to have the background map in there too. And now I asked, do we need all of these for the future exercises? So I just want to load them all into OMAP.
So
Or is that-
yes, you want to download them all. You do not need to, like, the background maps, OMAP will take care of that. Should take care of that.
Okay. True.
Because they should be linked. They should, like, OMAP should have them all linked together properly already.
Jeff, I did download it as a zip and unzip to one folder today, and everything worked
Okay.
the way that you've been talking. So
Okay, that's what I'm expecting.
But how did you get them into OMAP? I unzipped them, they haven't zipped, but how did you get them? Do you load them up singly into OMAP or as a group?
just file open.
Singly.
Singly, okay. And then I'm
Yeah,
getting,
just go to file open, Gould Lake tracing exercise, and all the templates, at least for me, loaded correctly.
but how did you do that? That's can't.
So
Like, I
file,
can't
so
to go all open. I can't do it all at once. I got to do it individually.
That's right.
You only have to open one file in Open Orienteering Mapper.
Ralph, do you have the ability to share your screen, Ralph?
No, I'll just carry on here. This is I'm holding the things up too much.
So, all right. Well, I'll keep going for another little bit, and then I'll check in with you again, Ralph, if folks are kind of going on their own for a little bit, and we'll hopefully you can get yourself sorted out.
Jeff, are questions still open, or are you about to talk about something else?
No, go ahead.
I was just in tracing over whatever, pick the contour and picked a line and
Yep.
got going, like clicking on all the different pick points, and anyway, it was all working fine, except that the length of the handles for the Bezier curves in the opposite direction of the direction I was plotting were not coming out the right length. So I had to go back over the whole entire contour line and like readjust them. Is
Yes.
that normal, or am I missing something?
That is normal.
Okay,
That is
great.
normal, and that is some of where the practice comes in. So there might be other ways to draw this, and maybe put in a few more points if you wanted to you can get the same curve. But then you're having to click more times, and so it's not necessarily more efficient to draw more curves and have to adjust less versus to just draw fewer points and then adjust them to get the shape that you want.
Yeah.
So that's one of the key things, and why it takes more practice and experience with Bezier curves to get them to show you what you want, because you do have to adjust to get that shape the way you want, right?
Jeff, I have another question on one of like the open contours, so not a hilltop.
Okay.
To do that first point as a Bezier curve, right? Click drag, no problem.
Yeah.
Right. How do you get the last point to have the handle without basically creating an extra Bezier curve and then deleting the finish point?
That that is a very good.
Or is that the way to do it?
So I'm just gonna pick a point here. So I've got 3 points on this this form line. So if I do click and drag, and then my next one I do a click and a drag, and then I do my last one here. I can do a click and drag and then a double click, and it's gonna add that last point in. The other way to do it, and so often I'll end up just doing that and deleting my last point. Or let me try this again. And I do a click drag, click and drag, and then a click and drag with the right mouse key instead of the left. And it will end the line on your last point. So for your last point, hold the right mouse button down instead of the left.
Okay. I may just keep deleting points, but perfect. Thank you.
That's often what I end up doing, because I always forget to switch and use the other mouse, the other cursor. So
Jeff, there have been some. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jeff, I found I've uploaded the background map and the tracing exercise map.
okay.
And then it's opening the Gould Lake contours with something. It's asking me for a scale.
So for some reason you've done something to the file. Maybe you had saved it previously and it didn't connect to that.
Well, I just downloaded everything as a zip file. That's
Yeah.
all I've done. I mean,
So for some reason it's
for some reason it's not coming.
it's not coming in the way I was expecting it to come in.
Okay. Well,
So
I have
would-
an older computer. Maybe that's why.
It sounds like she's opening a PNG file, not the OMAP file.
Well, she's trying to load the PNG file, I think, as a template here.
Hmm.
And the problem, and so yes, you can do it, but it's another step that I can
Oh,
show you how to do.
well, tell me where to load, how to load it then.
So can
Is it
you-
open differently?
Can you try
I-
re-downloading? and
Should I be
replacing-
importing things then instead of template? Like, maybe there's a different
No,
way of
I
bringing
think-
the files in.
I think what happened is that you've, at some point along the way,
Mhm.
but maybe hadn't downloaded everything, or I don't know what happened. You've lost the connection. So if you can re-download the Gould Lake tracing exercise file,
Mm-hmm.
re-download that, and then try it again and let me know if it works.
Yeah, but try what? Because how do I upload? I know I'm taking
just try
time
opening it again.
opening it. Okay, because I've been using templates, open template.
Okay, so you shouldn't need to open templates. 'Cause
Okay.
They should already be linked properly in the file.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna delete OOM and then re-download. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend re-downloading Open Orienteering Mapper. You shouldn't need to do that.
Okay, sorry. I just need to ask. I'm back at the start. Do I create a new map or open
No,
a map?
You're just gonna open a
Thank
map
you.
file.
Ralph, were you able to get your map to open?
No, well, I got the one map, but it's not interactive. I can't maneuver any of the Bezier stuff.
So you're not going to be able to manipulate the Bezier stuff. That's on a separate layer that you can't manipulate. The idea is that you're drawing over top of that. So all of these blue points, I can't click on them. They're just a static image
Oh,
as
okay.
a background layer. And the idea is
So-
that I'm using that to trace over top of that.
All right, okay. So what I'm tracing, I'm using the symbol, the first symbol upper left,
You're going to
whatever.
click on
it's
the
called,
contour symbol
contour
here.
interval. Yeah,
You're going to then click on this S symbol in the
Right.
upper menu. And then you're going to start tracing over, pick a line to work with.
okay,
And you're going to click on and try to replicate what you see with the brown lines with all the blue squares and circles.
okay. Thanks.
That's the idea. Okay, glad you've got that up and running.
Jeff, I think I found on the image template a Bezier handle that they're not collinear, right? They seem to be more
Okay, yeah.
170 degrees apart or something like that. Is that true, or is that an adjustment?
No,
We just haven't talked
it's
about
quite
yet.
possible that is true. I think I remember seeing one somewhere. I'm not going to be able to find it now. I don't even know how many points there are. There's probably like 800 points here to try to find one of them that's at an angle.
I can give you a hint if you'd like it.
Sure, why not?
So the top right-hand corner,
Yeah.
diagonal down the second elongated null,
Yeah.
just to your left there,
Okay.
with the null symbol or the hilltop symbol over by the form line.
Over by the form
Keep
here.
going just to
This
your
one?
left. Yep. Yeah. So that's the point.
Yeah,
that
so
I'm
that was
talking about.
slightly off. So the way to do that is to so you're just going to draw it in as normal to start. This will be the easiest way to do this. And then what you can do is if you hold down, I think it's the shift key. Yeah, you can move one without moving the other. So I'm holding the shift key and I'm moving my tag.
And you use that when you really have to get some weird geometry in.
I suspect in this case it's actually accidental on Eric's part because they're not far off. But certainly you might use that if you've got like a cliff. So if I had a cliff in here that had a sharp 90-degree corner, right? Something like that. So if I hide my template, it'll make a little bit more sense. Then that's where I might do something like that.
And that's basically just to save you a point or a couple points, right? You could do it all with 180, but it might take you 3 or 4 points to do that, right?
Like in terms of putting in a bunch of curves to make a really tight curve.
Yeah, exactly. Right. 2 points close to each other, basically to turn it really
Sure,
tight or
sure, you
something.
could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Or
in
you could
fact,
just,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, you could just end the curve at that bend and start again in a different direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's various ways to do that. You can also do that if I do drag, and then I can actually click and drag another point right from that same point. And if they're basically the same point, it will do that as well instead of editing it afterwards. So now I have that one point. And I've done that again. I'll repeat that. Click and drag, and then instead of clicking and dragging my next point from wherever I want my next point to be, I'm going to click and drag again from that same point, and then keep my curve going.
Yeah, I've noticed that if you draw 2 sections of curve and then you decide you want to join them with that join tool,
Yeah.
You'll often get a non-collinear handle thing going on with the joint.
For sure, and that might be how that was created in the first place, and then it was quick enough to straight that Eric didn't bother to fix it or didn't notice it, or
So can you describe how those little handles show up and why are some, yeah, how do they show up and how do you use those? I've been trying to replicate that and I can't seem to do it.
yeah. So to get it to show, so you're going to be on this first triangle, this mouse cursor button, which it's the edit objects tool.
Right.
And when you select something, it'll show all the points with the handles. And then when I click off of it and I deselect that particular line, it doesn't show them.
I tried that. It's not doing it. It just shows the square. It just highlights the square.
It's not showing you the handles,
No.
but is it a nice round shape?
What do you mean a round shape? I
So,
got
like-
squares along the line the Bezier line that I did over top of one of his, and it's all squares. But
So you're not seeing like this kind of a shape. You're seeing an actual, like a circular type of smooth round contour.
Well, it could be either one of those, but it's got dots along the.
So if it's not like this one here only shows me 4 squares at the corner.
Right.
Because it's not a curve. And so that's what I'm wondering about.
Yeah, no, okay. I've drawn a curve like what you've got highlighted, but there are no handles. And I click on one of the squares.
Maybe he used the freehand mode.
No, well, I was following what
Did you use this tool here with the pencil and the bit of a curve, or did you use this as
the S? You had said the S, I thought.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So that's what I used to trace.
And you're drawing it like I'm drawing it here.
Yeah, I'm not getting the numbers, but
that's fine. I can turn that on and off.
Yeah.
And
I'm getting the squares, but I don't.
You're not
I
seeing.
clicked on and off the squares to try and get the handle, but I can't seem to do it.
Okay. Well, without seeing your screen, I can't give you much more of an answer. I would be happy to have you share your screen and see if I can get you more of an answer.
Okay, I'll try it. Do you want to try it?
Yeah, give it a go.
Screen sharing. Where's the? Oh, you've disabled screen sharing.
Oh, I thought I had turned that on. Okay, let me, nope, sorry, wrong thing here. Okay, try now, Ralph.
Okay, there it is. Where's my screen that I'm doing here? Okay, let's try this. Share. Okay, so can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
This is the line I drew over one of his.
Yeah.
When I click on it, I get all these
Yeah,
squares.
so you've drawn that using that other tool. So if you look in your menu bar at the top,
Yeah,
I want you to be using the fourth from the left.
that's the one I did.
First
I
of the
did
black.
this one, use that same tool. So I
Okay,
click there.
can you show me that process? Okay, I think you're clicking and letting go. You're not clicking and holding down the mouse key while you drag. Yeah, you're drawing a series of individual straight line segments. So delete those all again, and let's slow this down and see if I can get you going.
Okay, I click on that.
Click on that. So click a point and don't move the mouse.
Oh, okay, let me try again.
So I'm just going to try to really break this down for you. So now, yeah. So click on that tool and then hover over the white somewhere. Click down and hold the mouse key down.
Yeah,
Drag your mouse to the right
yeah,
while holding that button down. Now lift your finger off of the mouse.
yeah.
Now move your mouse. Now click somewhere else. Hold the mouse key down. Okay, something's not working for you because it shouldn't have drawn that as a straight line segment.
I think that what happened, that demo that you were going kind of slow with, I think, Ralph, you didn't um, continue to hold. The second time you clicked, I think you clicked and let go, which would draw a straight line rather
Yeah,
than
that might be it, Eric.
click and hold and drag off in the direction and then
Yeah,
go to
but
your
when,
next
how
point.
do I mark where the curve is?
So
It's gonna.
So at
No,
each point you're basically dragging parallel, which is you're dragging in a direction, which is going to be the tangent to that line. And then you're going to lift your finger off the mouse. On your next point, you're going to do that same action. So you're going to click down, drag while holding the mouse key down, the mouse button down. So from, yeah, there now. Yeah. And so now you've got a bit of a curve. So now click somewhere else. And okay, so you're clicking and letting go on that second click, on that, in this case, third click. So every time you click down, you want to move the mouse sideways and then lift your finger off the mouse.
Oh, I see. Oh, there, okay.
So now you've got kind of a combination here of straight lines and curves.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, it's a matter of hand-eye coordination mentally.
Yeah. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain the physical action of it over Zoom. Like if I was sitting beside you, I could see exactly what your finger is doing, and it'd be a little bit less painful, I think, for everyone involved.
Next level Zoom with extra cameras for our hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Okay, good. I'm glad you got that finally. It's good. How is everyone else doing? Got a thumbs up from Andrew Bell.
Forgot if I'm turned on. I'm doing fine. I'm almost done. Just kidding.
That would be impressive. It'd be very impressive.
I found the literally goes corner to corner by accident.
So you can always draw segments of a contour and then continue it separately. Like you don't have to draw end to end necessarily in one go.
Jeff, how do you get those orange numbers beside your cursor?
Yes. Somebody in a previous class had to figure this out for me because I turned them on accidentally and then I had totally lost track of how I had done it. I think it's with the Control Alt or Control Shift or something. Control space. Toggles
Uh-huh.
that on and off.
Okay, nice.
Hi, Jeff.
Yeah.
I had to step out for a bit, but I'm back, and
Okay.
now I can say that I have the map too.
Yeah.
So what do I do with the cursor to allow it to for me to move the blue things?
Okay.
It's
So
not.
are you able to draw the shape to begin with, and now you're just wanting to edit it? I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking.
I'm asking what tool on the menu should I click on to allow my cursor to be activating the blue things?
Okay. So the blue things from that template, like I see a whole bunch of blue things all around my screen, right? My screen that I think I'm not sharing, what I thought I was. So you look at my screen and you see that I've got blue squares and circles and lines all over my map.
Mm-hmm.
So those ones I can't edit because those are just in a background layer.
Oh, so I have to draw a square around.
You're going to have to
them?
draw your own, and then you can edit those that you're drawing. So to draw your own, you're going to click on the contour or the form line or pick a line. You're going to use the S draw paths tool, and then you're going to draw your line by clicking, holding the mouse key down, dragging in a direction, letting go. So now I don't have my finger on the mouse right now. Next point, I'm going to click down, drag sideways, let go of the mouse button, and then repeat at each
Got it.
point.
Thank you.
And then once I'm done with that, I can then go back and I can edit and I can drag the points.
Sorry, Jeff, how do you join two lines that are beside each other?
Sure. So if you've got two lines that you want to join, so let me draw another one here. So now I want to select both of them. So I can select both of them by clicking and dragging a box around them. I can select both of them, or I can select by clicking one and then holding the shift key down and selecting the other. And then it's this tool here. It's a circle with the top part of that circle is blue. Labeled connect path, and I click on that and it will join them together into one symbol or one object rather.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. The C key is also a shortcut for that. So if I undo that, I can drag around both and then I can just hit C on my keyboard and I don't need to bother moving my mouse up to the menu.
And Jeff,
Okay.
they have to be pretty well touchy there, right? Like if there's any significant gap or whatever, it just never seems to do anything for me. Is that
Yeah, I'm
kind
not
of
sure what
correct understanding?
yeah, there's a kind of a tolerance, a threshold tolerance for how close they have to be, and I'm actually not sure what that is, but yes, they have to be close enough together or it won't join them.
Yeah, and I've noticed that if they're close enough but not very close, it'll create 2 points, even though it'll join them. It'll create 2 points that are very close to one another. And sometimes if they're really like right on top of each other, it will like make just 1 point to replace the two ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know what the tolerance is for that either.
You certainly can set it in OCAD. Open orienteering mapper is not quite as flexible with those settings. Click tolerance snap. It might you be using, no, probably not the snap distance. Anyway, bottom line is I'm not actually sure if that's editable or not as a setting. You'll get used to it, to what it is, and then it'll just become habit as part of your process.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to make sure I was using it correctly, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, for sure.
So a question
Mhm.
to the next level. So I was able to replicate the line without the handles and the line with the handles. What's the advantage of using the handles to manipulate the curve?
Well, so when you actually print it, it's gonna look a lot smoother. So this is my smooth curve here. And if I were to trace over this, let's draw something beside it. Kind of
No, I meant just when you, on those, on that, go back to your
Yeah.
drawing, yeah,
yeah.
on those handles, those circle that are on each, the squares. What's the advantage of having that? Like I can replicate the line without the handles and with the handles, so, and I can still manipulate the curve. What advantage does that curve, those handles give me?
So ultimately, like when you print it, it's going to be smoother and it's going to be noticeable to certainly somebody with an experienced eye is going to will notice the difference in terms of how it looks on the final printed map. But the other thing is that yes, you can do it either way, but with practice, and that's a big caveat, is with practice, the drawing it with these curves with the handles will become more efficient because you can do it with fewer points. So if I'm doing it just as a segment of a lot of little points, I need to draw like a whole bunch of points to get a curve, right? Or if I'm doing this similarly, but with the curves, I do a 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, and then my last point that I screwed up again. And I've got that with just 3 points. So with practice, you will be able to draw faster using the Bezier curves.
Yeah, no, they're both Bezier curves, but I don't understand why. How do you use those handles to manipulate the curve?
So if
Like
I
when you
click, so when I've got
Click on that, when you click on that curve, that
Yeah.
handle, you can start maneuvering the
Yes.
curve. And
Yeah.
but what advantage does that give you? Like, how do you use that?
Well, so it allows me to change the shape of this curve. So if I've got this curve here and I want to draw, something that is like a bigger bend, like a sharper bend here, I can do that by dragging these curves out. Versus if I want to do it without moving the curves, I have to I can do it by adding another point, and then again I need to manipulate them sideways. Or I can do it as if I'm doing it with just a straight line segments, I have to add in a whole bunch of points on my curve to get my curve to look what I want it to look like. I kind of went through that a little bit fast. Is that making sense to you, Rob?
Yeah, it's starting to. That's like I guess it's just another way of manipulating the curve. Is there a way to see does it give you readouts of the angle somewhere? Like when you're holding that, when you're using that handle, is there a readout to say, okay, this is the angle that I'm turning it to?
No, other than just the curve itself, like the brown line itself that you're seeing, right? Like it's showing it to me as I move the handle,
Yeah, yeah.
but it doesn't give it to me as as a number, as a mathematical value.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering if you had some reason to say, okay, I need it at 90 degrees.
Right.
And I was just wondering if in some place on the lower part of the screen where they have the click, drag, shift click thing, there might have been some data on it, but okay.
I mean, it does give you like a coordinate offset and a distance here, right? As I
Where's
move
that?
it around, but it doesn't give you an angle.
Where does it give the coordinate offset?
So just right in the very bottom left of my screen. Or your screen if you're.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Millimeters distance.
Yeah, so it is showing me like how much I'm moving it and what my distance is. But typically I'd be looking at the actual shape of the curve.
Right.
Is what I would be looking at and trying to get that, because I'm trying to get that to match, in this case, what I'm tracing or
Yeah.
the LiDAR data, right?
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, a lot of this is like, we're doing 2 hours of hands-on just practicing, because a lot of it is just getting a feel for it. And just you'll understand it more as you play around with it more. Right, and you'll start to understand how, okay, when I drag it, it does this. When I turn this, move it to the side, it does this, right? All right, I've heard a bunch from some of you. Some of you have been totally silent. So just probably totally fine. But I'm gonna call a few of you out and check in with folks.
Can I ask a question, Jeff?
Sure, that's Stefan.
Yeah. So my sort of feeling like with this exercise is that it feels a bit unnatural to me to be trying to replicate like I'm clicking on each of the
Yeah.
square, and whereas like if I, for example, turn off that layer in my open orienteering mapper and have the other one, which is labeled Gould Lake Tracing Exercise Full.
Yeah.
And then if I just try and like, because I think if I was tracing like contours that were made from LiDAR, I wouldn't have these example points. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, what's your strategy for sort of that? Because I think I kind of go in. Actually, I'm the type of person who likes to draw not curves, but just bunch of points and then use the convert to curves tool and then adjust it from there. But if I was to become more comfortable, and I would like to become more comfortable actually drawing curves from the get-go, do you sort of like pick like inflection points in a shape and then kind of, and then you pull, like what's your, like if I don't have that example layer below and I want to draw a curve quickly, like do I pick the first point and then go like, okay, inflection, and by inflection point I mean like, where it sort of curves or changes.
Yeah, so that's one of our next exercises. Is to do it without the points. So you're so no, it's that's good. Yes, the inflection point is going to be, generally speaking, the most efficient point to draw it on. Sometimes like at the ends of a reentrant or the ends of a spur, I will often put a point there because it helps give me just a finer control of that specific end of a reentrant or a spur, which is important to how that is being represented. So at that point, it's not at the inflection point, it's at the end of the curve, because I guess another way to look at that is that you want, typically you kind of want a point every 90 degrees around a curve. So if I do this and I take out this middle point, right, I can stretch where my point is, but I only have so much control, right? Whereas now if I put this in here, I can kind of stretch the end of it and I can play around with that tip and I can draw the tip of that reentrant or spur exactly as I want to show it. And drawing the ends of those spurs and reentrants really can make a big difference to how it reads to the orienteer as they're running through the woods.
So you want enough degrees of freedom, but not too many. Just the right amount. It's
Yeah, I mean you can add lots of extra points.
Yeah.
But the more points you have, the less smooth it's going to be, and the less smooth it is, the less intuitive it is the less quickly the map reader can pick it up and interpret it. Does that make sense?
Jeff, do you mind I don't know if you've got time for this, but do you mind taking me through the steps of doing those dot points where they connect? Because mine is coming out as lines and then they join to each other.
So where they connect, can you?
No, like you just did a circuit drawing just now where you had dots and then the computer fills in the curve between them. Whereas mine, I don't know why, but mine don't come up as dots. I guess maybe I'm dragging. But then I lift to get to the, maybe you could just go through it if you don't.
I'll walk through this. I'll walk through this again. So for my first point, I'm going to click the left mouse button and not release it, but I'm holding it down and I'm dragging to the side. Now I release the mouse button, so I'm not clicking on the mouse button. I move my mouse to somewhere else. I click down. While holding that mouse button down, I drag to the side again, release, move my mouse, press down, move sideways, release, and repeat.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm using the wrong tool.
So you need this S tool that is to the left
Okay.
of the O, of the black O.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, my sense, and I know some folks are still kind of just getting the hang of this. But my sense is that we should take a bit of a break from this. We're at an hour and a half of our 3-hour session. That we should take 5 minutes, stretch your legs, go grab a glass of water or a beer, whatever you want. Go to the bathroom, do what you got to do. And then we check back in, we'll go through some more discussion and then switch back to open our orienteering mapper again in a little bit. So let's take 5 and we'll reconvene and I will share my PowerPoint presentation again and we'll go through some of that theoretical stuff. Ian, are you there? Ian was just gonna ask you. I hadn't heard from you while we were doing the practicing. How was all that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Switching microphones.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it went good. There's definitely like a trade-off I found. There was a point earlier made about, I can trace the line in one go, but using more points or using the less points and then adjusting it after with the handles.
Yeah.
And then I think I also found a line with a missing point.
It's possible.
Yeah, there's like a hint of where the handle should be. It's just like a quarter of the handle.
Yeah, the problem was to efficiently generate that background map. Like normally it doesn't show you all the handles, right? So
Yeah.
I had to kind of like select them, and then if I zoomed out and showed it, then they were all tiny and mushed together. So I had to zoom in, and so then I like took like 3 dozen screenshots and stitched them all back together, and
Yeah, for sure.
things got cut apart during that process. Elizabeth, how about you? Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you're trying to say something and don't realize you're on mute, or if you're not there. We'll keep moving, but I'll try to check in again later in the class. Robbie, I assume everything's good on your end?
Oh yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Cool. All right, so for this next part, and apologies in advance, Robbie, I might call you out on some of this for the next couple of slides here. Where's my Zoom meeting? Share screen again. All right, so we had talked previously about the 3 components of navigation. So route choice, planning, and execution and zoom map reading. So for route choice, I've got an example here, and I want to go through this example and kind of show some of the elements that help make this route choice help kind of allow you to choose your route choices in terms of how these contours are drawn. So this is a map called the ARC. Some of you have run on this map back last summer. So this is the last big project that I've completed. And here's a kind of a classic route choice, longer leg, lots of options. And you can use the annotate tool in Zoom. And can you quickly draw on a route for me here, and then we'll talk about how you chose that. You guys gonna make me name names? All right, Andrew Bell, I see you smiling. Oh, Robbie's drawn on a route there. So, okay, and Andrew's drawn something else on in the same color.
I gave up.
You just give up and go home halfway through the leg.
Hey, at least I got to the leg.
Yeah. All right, well, Robbie, since you've got a full one there, why don't you walk us through kind of what you see there in terms of the contours specifically that makes you think that's a good option.
Yeah, basically just looking for the big stuff. So obviously like the big hill that you come off, and then there's hill, 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 with the kind of stream reentrant X separating all of them. And then beyond is another small hill, kind of long hill, another hill. So just kind of snaking my way through them.
So when you say the big things, what about the way the map is drawn tells you that those are the big things?
On each of them, there are several contours high. Like I wouldn't use this one, for example, because it's only, well, it's barely one contour and just some form lines. So when I'm looking up in the terrain, that's not going to be something that will catch my eye.
Yeah. So looking for those parallel lines, right? And again, we'll get into this more later. But obviously the closer they are together, the steeper it is. The more of them, the higher it is. And then I guess them being truly parallel. So you might have multiple lines trying to look for kind of an example here on this. So over in this section here, can everybody see? I'll circle it in red here. This section that I'm talking about here, where I do have multiple lines, but there's other stuff going on in there as well. They're not all parallel contour lines, so there's more going on. It is generally speaking a big hillside, but there's more detail going on there, so it's gonna be harder to see just the big slope and to use that to navigate as a big feature, right? So looking for those parallel lines, and so keeping that in mind when we're drawing that okay, the parallel lines are something that I'm going to see as a big slope when there's more when there's extra curves in some of them. It's going to be harder to see it as a single continuous feature, right? Because we talked about this a little bit earlier, that you don't see individual contours in the terrain, right? You see a hill, you see a slope, you see a big shape, but you don't see that individual line, right? So it's the way the lines interact with each other that is telling us what the shape of that terrain is, what the big features are versus the smaller features, right? It's how the contours interact with each other. So broadly speaking, something to keep in mind. That's not very practical advice as of yet, but we will, as we go through some more of these examples about how to draw those contours and how they interact with each other, it will start to make, well, hopefully it starts to make more sense, right? So kind of route choice, another option that I see would potentially be to kind of come this way, climb through the contour, the cliffs there, and then come and kind of stay left there. It might be slightly less climb, but I'm on a slope, right? All these parallel lines, I'm kind of on the slope there. But by not crossing too many of them, I'm staying pretty level. And I can see this thicker one, this index contour. I'm following that index contour all the way around, right? So that tells me that I'm staying on that level and I'm not gaining or losing too much height, right? So that's another factor that I can factor into my route choice, right? Is how much climb am I doing up or down? And Robbie's route drawn and Eric, you're basically took the same route as well. Once you crossed this stream here, you actually ended up you were weaving in between the hills, so you weren't going up or down that much as well, right? It wasn't something that you mentioned there, but another factor in that, right? So clearing that, the next element is the planning. And there we go. Oops, one too many. So the planning, so as I've got the same leg up. And I think, Robbie, you really captured that when you were talking about looking for, you had picked out all these hills that you were looking for, right? These are the things that you're going to be looking for. That's your plan, right? Go to this hill, then go to the next hill, then go to the next hill, right? Any level of detail that you would add to that, Robbie, as one of our national team athletes, in terms of how you would think about planning this and reading those contours?
I don't know.
As I said, you kind of already captured the planning element of it in the way you described your legs. So
I don't know if I really have anything to add.
okay, no, fair enough. Yeah, you picked out the big features. And that's really what I wanted to get at with the planning piece of it too, right? So there's the climb and the distance element. And then what are the things that you're looking for along the way, and those are those big hills that you already highlighted. So that kind of captures that. I have a totally different leg, different section of the same map. We're talking about the zoom map reading here. So there's a lot going on as I'm running through the terrain. I'm going to be kind of trying to connect the map and the terrain back and forth. Okay, this is that pond. Okay, this is that knoll. What am I expecting it to look like? I read the map, and then how do I expect the terrain to look like based on reading the map? So if I'm coming in across like the last part into this control here, 1 to 2, what am I expecting that terrain to look like? So let's hear from somebody that we haven't heard from on the previous leg. What do you see from this, and what do you kind of expect it to look like?
Seeing a slope leading sort of from southwest to northeast there down towards that pond. So if you're
Okay, yeah.
coming in, it should be sloped sort of uphill on your left and downhill towards your right.
It's actually the
If I'm reading that, I'm reading that
but-
opposite. Okay.
But yeah, the big lake, and then this
Oh.
is lower, and then these marshes are higher up.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so there's generally speaking, there's a slope there, but then there's a lot of detail going on, right? And this is where the difference is between kind of reading it in terms of route choice and reading for this what I keep referring to as zoom map reading. And to find this knoll, there's a whole bunch of other knolls and other little high points. You need to be able to really picture the details of what it is that you're looking for, right? And so if I'm coming across, let's say I'm staying a little bit left of the line and then kind of climbing in here, I see I see kind of a sharp bend here. So I'm going to see that. There's a bit of a shape here that I see as well. I see this is like a reentrant on both sides here. So there's a shape there. It's kind of subtle. It's just a form line. It's not a big multi-contour shape there, but there is a shape there. And then I'm coming up, and it flattens out, and this marsh helps me with that, but it flattens out, and I see a bunch of high points there, and I have to pick the right high point as I'm coming in, right? So if I'm picturing that on the left, it's going down on the left. There's this double reentrant shape that feeds together into a reentrant. I need to be above that, so I want to climb out of that, and I'm looking for a high point with another knoll and another form line shape behind it on the far side of that control circle, right? And so this is where drawing in some of that detail comes in when I'm thinking about actually how I'm drawing my map, so that I'm seeing all these details, but to the right level. So that in this case, I would argue that they're all pretty much the same. These individual dot knolls are drawn as dot knolls because they're small in shape. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're low and subtle, depending on kind of, again, being consistent across the map. And then there's these single form line shapes in here. So I'm wanting to read all of that. If there was one that really stood out, I'd want to emphasize that more by drawing it with two, a form line and a contour line, or the contour line, depending on the situation. I would want to emphasize it more so that I can communicate to the orienteer that, hey, this is something that's more prominent than what you see around you. So rely on that one more than on the others.
What's the blue dot in the center of that?
So that's a small pond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So all the blue is water, and that's a symbol. They changed the way that they suggest you draw in the international standard, the kind of the minimum size pond, and they've drawn it with this. I don't actually like it that much going back to this map, because it looks more prominent than some of the other ponds where I've drawn the shape with the lighter blue. But that's a little pond, a little spot of water.
If I also see on here about a third of the way on the leg on the left, you've changed an index contour to a standard. I assume to get
like in
the
here?
right amount of detail in here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so
So-
the mapping specification allows that in areas where there's a lot of detail. So that I can, like, for example, I see the gap around this knoll. Right? And if this line was thicker, then that gap between the contour line and the knoll would disappear. So I've determined, so the index contours are really helpful for that route choice aspect and determining the amount of climb. So I can easily count my index contours instead of counting, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 contours. I can just count, okay, 1 index contour up, that's 5 contours, that's 25 meters. So it helps me judge climb and elevation. But where I'm wanting to get into a really detailed area, and it's probably looking at more of that zoom map reading, I'll sacrifice that element of being able to count the climb more easily, and follow along an elevation more easily in favor of making the map more legible with that detail.
Okay, neat.
So we've talked about the kind of big picture theoretical, how are maps used in different ways? What are they trying to show? They're trying to get across information that helps with route choice, planning, execution, and that zoom map reading, that detailed navigation map reading. But looking at it from a different perspective of the contours specifically, what are we trying to show with the contours, right? So going back, mathematically, your contours are showing equal elevation, and they're showing a distance between equal elevation, right? So every 5 meters, there's a line. So I can count my elevation that way. And perfectly equal. However, that's not what the orienteer sees. So what we're trying to show when we're drawing the contours by hand or adjusting, if you've got a certain terrain, it might make sense to use the LiDAR contours and then just adjust them. You're wanting to show the high points and the low points, right? This is one of the things that you guys came up with earlier. What do you see when you're navigating? You see the high points and the low points. You want to see the shapes in the terrain. You want to see a list of things here. So this first example, I'll touch on this aspect of high points and low points. This terrain, there's a lot of contour stuff going on. Super interesting piece of terrain. And I'm really trying to highlight a lot of these little hilltops, right? So that I can look up and I can see the hilltops and I can match those up with the map when I'm orienteering through there, and I can kind of go from high point to high point. There's also a few low points specifically picked out. There's one here, it's got the 2 taglines. There's a pit and a depression kind of scattered throughout. There's a couple of those as well. But picking out, and so when I'm doing my contour drawing, I'm wanting to highlight those high points and those low points, because that's what is going to make the orienteering easier, right? So I really want to kind of, okay, here's the top, rather than the shape maybe of further down the hill. And we've also got shapes in terrain. So shapes in terrain can kind of mean a couple of things. It might be kind of shapes of through, re-entrance and spurs and that kind of thing, if you're in that kind of spur gully terrain. Or it's the shapes of the high points and the low points themselves. So in this example, this is outside of Guelph, Ontario. Map I did 5 years ago. And I do have some small cup depressions drawn in small cup depressions, but I've got others where they're still pretty small. So this one here, for example, or this one here in this form line. But I've drawn those not with that cup depression because they've got maybe an interesting shape that is worth showing to differentiate it from a different depression. And so I've drawn this here, a little bit of a different shape than this, which is a little bit narrower on the bottom left versus on the top right. Or this one here has a very distinct bend in it that I've really tried to capture. And so you can really try to emphasize those unique shapes to help folks differentiate between one one hill from another or one depression from another, right? So keeping that in mind as I'm drawing those contours. And then we've got the relative heights of features and the relative prominence of features. So height, when I'm saying the relative height of features, I'm meaning, for example, here in this section, just in the kind of lower left of center, I've got a bunch of these elongated knolls. And you can, if you are kind of careful with your drawing, as I was here, you can show that this knoll here is actually higher than this other knoll here, because I've drawn it above this form line. So I don't necessarily need this form line, but the base of this knoll is going to be higher than the base of this knoll here, is what I'm saying by drawing this form line in. So I'm showing that one knoll is above the other. John, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, make sure you can hear me here. Can you talk briefly, this is a good map where you've shown trying to use the annotate tool here, and there we go, 1 and 2, so many people think contour lines are sacrosanct, can't possibly break them, and here you've done 2 breaks to huge positive effect. Can you talk about that quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go into this a lot more in further classes, but it's a really, really good point. For the specification actually states that for knolls, you should not break your contours. I treat that should very, very loosely. If I had drawn this contour around to the side, it would look like there's this big, massive spur sticking out with a knoll on top. But in this case, that's not really what it is. It's kind of this smaller feature right on the edge of the top. So there's as you crest the top of this this kind of 2 contour slope here, you get into this flat area with this other knoll. There's kind of this high point, this little knoll on the top of that edge, but there's no actual spur there. Whereas if I were to draw this contour around it, I'd be implying that there's a spur shape there, and there isn't. And so I've said, okay, the easiest way to do this is to put this knoll here and just cut the contour, right? And you have to cut the contour so that the knoll stands out. So to make the knoll more prominent, I cut that. Similarly with the pit, I don't want to draw around that because it's implying then that there's this bigger depression or bigger reentrant shape there around that pit. But I would also state with the pits versus the depressions, to me, one of the differentiating factors is that a depression is kind of a part of the natural shape of the terrain, whereas a pit feels like it's either man-made or there's some specific process that has created this pit there. It doesn't flow with the rest of the terrain. And so for pits, I almost always cut the contours. Whereas for depressions, I draw the depression, I use the depression symbol versus the pit symbol when it is more natural and flows into the rest of the terrain. And therefore it sometimes does make sense to draw that contour around and then show the bottom point with that depression. Any additional comments on that, John?
No, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So that was when I said relative heights. I started off by talking about like the bottoms of these knolls, and I can kind of show that one knoll is higher up on the slope than the other by putting that form line in between, for example, right, as a way of showing that. And then I talk about the prominence of features, and so the prominence is a term that describes how much a hill, for example, sticks out above the terrain around it. So the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill typically would be its prominence. And so this can be another important factor, because this is what helps you simplify and helps you plan, right? Robbie was talking about, oh, I picked out the bigger ones and they're the multiple contours together, right? So he's looking for the features that are more prominent, that you'll be able to see sooner, that you'll be able to pick out from further away. And so in this example here, I've got right in the middle here, I've got a bunch of form line hills but then, and they're these kind of these big, subtle, broad high points. But then in this middle one, I've drawn a contour in there. So that's showing that, okay, that actually sticks out one level higher than the other ones that are just shown with a single contour line or single form line, right? Where is there kind of another example? Well, here's a really clear example here. I've got this one form line shape, and then just to the southeast of it, I've got form line, contour, form line, right? So that one is much more prominent than this one beside it, right? And so arguably I could say, well, you know, I could just show the single contour line, but to really show that this is far more prominent, I'm going to emphasize it with drawing in some extra brown lines there to really show that, no, there's a significant slope there that's much more significant than what I got around it. Even if it's only 5 meters, and I could argue that, hey, I can draw that with just one contour line, I'm going to emphasize that prominence by using some additional lines there, right? And so this is where we're getting into, okay, I'm thinking about what is important to the orienteer, and I'm drawing in such a way that I'm helping them along. Whereas the LiDAR's kind of dumb. It doesn't think about what the orienteer is going to see, right? It's just going to say, okay, well, here, this is at 5 meters above sea level. I'm going to draw a line here, right? And so the art to this that makes it a practice versus a process is thinking about, okay, what are they going to see when they're standing in the terrain here? And what am I really wanting to show them to best show the high points, low points, the shapes, the relative heights and prominences, the steepness of slopes, and all of this other stuff, right? And how do I capture that? Even if it means that you're deviating from the strict definition of an equal elevation every 5 meters. Because realistically, when you're standing in the woods, you're not, I don't know what elevation I'm at, whether I'm at 10 meters above sea level or 20 meters above sea level, right? So keeping your end user in mind.
Jeff, just a quick question. I see a lot of these intermediary, these form lines you put in, but they're not necessarily have to be the same elevation, right? They're just there to emphasize the features. Is that right or no?
Well, yes and no. So strictly speaking, like you're strictly speaking, your contours should be basically every 5 meters. Your form lines don't have to be halfway in between. You can shift them down. You're trying to find where the shape is important to draw. But at the same time, I don't want to draw 2 form lines. One is 2 meters higher than the other and just use the same form line. Because instinctively or intuitively, you want them to be, as a map reader, I want those to be at the same level. Right? And so again, I'm trying to draw what is intuitive to the orienteer, even though, yes, strictly speaking, there's no rule saying that they have to be at the same height above sea level. I can draw one at 6 meters above sea level and one at 8 meters above sea level. But something's going to feel wrong when I'm in the woods holding that map in my hand, if that's the case.
Okay.
So very good question. So for this next one, it's talking about steepness of slope and changes in slope. So here's an example where I've pretty much followed in this case the LiDAR's information. I haven't really stretched it. I haven't had to, but you can really see that there's a really steep slope here. The contours are closer together. And then, you know, to the left and to the right of that, it's much shallower, right? There's much more space between the contours. But I can emphasize that with these bends in it. There's a clear change in shape, right? And so you can see here where I've kind of come along, it's steep, and then there's a kind of a natural line in the terrain right at the top of that steep slope, and then it flattens out above it, right? And so I'm drawing that change in slope there by clearly, you can see I've kind of pulled this contour into a bend there, right? I could draw that more smoothly, which would indicate that there isn't as much of a sharp change in slope there, but I can kind of pull these corners out a little bit to emphasize that edge and that change in slope, right? So you can play with the shapes of your contours to not just show your steepness of slope, but to clearly show the edges. If there's kind of an edge of a steep section or an edge of a shallow section, right? So we'll get into a lot of this stuff a lot more over the next 2 weeks. And then finally climb. And I touched on the concept of the index contours really helping with this before. But here you can see like I've got a big climb. And so if I'm making a route choice, I can count my contours here to show up my climb, and basically how much higher is the top of this than the bottom of this, or do I need to go part way up? And so you're showing that simply with the number of contours. So there's not quite as much there. But if we look at the order that I put these in, they're very much in order on purpose. At the bottom of this list, the climb, the changes in slope, the steepness of slopes, we're looking mostly at our route choice. That's going to help with making our route choices. And as I go further up, I'm looking at kind of more of that stuff that I'm going to look at when I'm planning out what are the big features that I'm looking for, the prominence, the relative heights. And then as I'm getting into the shapes and the high points, I'm looking more at kind of that detailed navigation aspect, right? And so I'm using different elements of what these contours are showing to capture the different ways that I'm map reading. So that takes us to this idea of this contour spectrum. But I'm going to leave this for now. If we've got some time, we have another hour left, we'll come back to this. Otherwise, we'll touch on this at the beginning of next week. Okay, so this is just a kind of recapturing the rest of it in a different way, but I start comparing it to LiDAR. And so I'm going to leave it for now, and we'll come back to this concept.
If do you mind going back to that last slide with that map?
Absolutely. This one here?
I was just noting, like, if there was a control that brought you into this section of map from the west on essentially on that big trail, and then you needed to go kind of towards that steeper slope, you would actually be, if you didn't look more broadly, you might not notice that one of the index contours has been changed to a standard contour.
Yes.
If you're heading east.
Yeah.
But it's such a busy area in terms of all various things going on. I imagine you would infer. I don't know. It just sort of stood out to me that that's one spot.
Yeah. So some of you may know David Bacher, and I've had this conversation with him where I have a tendency to cut the index contours much more generously than he does. And I think partially it comes from a different type of terrain. And he's out in BC, where it's a lot, these bigger slopes, many parallel contours. And so being able to evaluate the height and the, find your contouring along the side of a hill is, generally speaking, something that's more important compared to in a lot of the terrain where I am in Eastern Ontario, where there's a lot more of this detail going on. And so this is a section where I figure you're more likely to be doing that zoom map reading and picking out all these different subtle little hilltops. And it's less important to judge that this is parallel to, or this contour lines up with this next contour over here. Right. And so I'm choosing which element is more important here. And in this case, I've decided that it's more important to prioritize the legibility of all the little details in this section. And I'm sacrificing that ease of, okay, quickly, here's where I'm counting my contours. Angela, I see your screen lighting up there. Do you have a question?
No, that was an accident.
No, fair enough. Just thought I'd check in. All right, so let's go back to open orienteering mapper, and I'm going to open our next example that we'll look at, our next exercise. So I'm going to click open, and I'm going to pick for this next one we'll do the arc tracing exercise. So you see here I've got a bunch of different arc files, and I'm going to use the arc tracing exercise.omap, and that will be an empty file, but with those other arc files in as background maps or as templates that'll show up behind for me to trace on. And it showed up on my other screen. So here you go. All right, so this is the same basic exercise as we were doing earlier, but I'm not showing you the handles. So if you feel you need more time with the handles, you're more than welcome to take this time and spend it with that, or give this a shot and see what you can do. It's really up to you to decide how you want to spend this time. I encourage you to come back to these exercises during the week or on the weekend if you have time before we meet again next week. Because this contour drawing stuff is all about practice. To be able to efficiently go through and draw these. So same basic exercise, you get to pick where you put the handles, the points in the handles. And we had a really good question from Stefan earlier. So let's pick, I'm gonna pick one of these form lines as an example here. So let's take this form line here, and how do I draw this in efficiently? I'm gonna say, I was gonna say in as few points as possible, but that's not necessarily the goal. So if I draw over this, so I'm starting at the bottom left, or the bottom, and I'm going to the top. And I'm going to pick those inflection points. So where the curve sort of changes direction. And then here, I could jump to the next point, but it's far more than my 90 degrees that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to pick one at the end of this. And then I'm going to pick my next inflection point where the curve changes direction. And again, more than 90 degrees. So pick one at the end of that. And so basically at my inflection points here, I'm going to skip the end of that curve, draw my next point, and then I can kind of draw a few points at the end. And then on my last point, I'm going to do a right click, and that's going to end it. And then I can kind of fine tune my shape by moving these points to fine tune it, to get it to match the way I want it to match. So I'm gonna pull that one out, pull that one out. This doesn't quite match here, so let's just change that a little bit. Pull this, needs to come out some more. Right. And I'm spending a lot of time getting it to match exactly. Normally, of course, when you're drawing your map, you wouldn't be tracing pre-existing contours. You'd be working from LiDAR. And so you wouldn't have something to match it to exactly, because the point is not to match the LiDAR contours, right? So you need to decide where you want to draw that line, and then get it to show the shape that you're kind of picturing in your head that you want it to show. But I've set these exercises up to just get you comfortable with drawing those curves, so that you'll be a little bit less frustrated when you're first drawing from LiDAR, and you can focus more on the actual shape of the curves rather than how you're drawing the shape, right? So I'll let you all have that, and like last time, I will answer questions as they come up, interact with you guys as needed. I guess the other one thing I will say at this point is, particularly when it comes to form lines, it doesn't make a difference for contour lines, but you can manipulate the positioning of your gaps by drawing in your dash points. So to draw a dash point, so if I've got a shape like this, and I'm just going to hide my background map so you can just see the shape here. And let's say I don't want this gap where I want it, where it is here. So if I hold the space key down and I click on this point, it's going to change it from a square to a diamond. And it's going to say, nope, you can't put a space there, and it shifts all these spaces elsewhere to avoid that. So you want that in particular at the tips of spurs and reentrance. So I don't want a shape that is like that example. That's exactly what I do want. But let's draw this in like this. I don't really want this, because now I don't have that tip, that steepest part of that curve well defined. So if I hold the space bar down and I turn that to a dash point, then I get that solid shape. And now it's just drawn as a single solid line instead of a line with a gap at the end. So that's something to consider when you're drawing here.
And how did you get the breaks again? Sorry, I missed that.
So it will naturally draw in your gaps every roughly whatever the distance is. John, do you know off the top of your head what the length of a dash is on a form line? No? Okay, fair enough.
No.
Every so often it will put these evenly spaced dashes, right? In the form line. So normally speaking, I'm not placing where those gaps are. The software is saying every 30 millimeters or every 3 millimeters or whatever it is along that line, I'm going to put a gap. But then I can explicitly say, don't put a gap here by adding a point. So if I add a point here, I can add a point by holding the control key, and then I can change it by clicking on that point while holding the spacebar key, and it's going to take that point away, right? So now it's showing a gap there, spacebar, and click on the point, and now there isn't a gap in that spot.
At what point did you hold the control key? You said
I held the control key to add a point in the middle here. So I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 points. I want to add one in the middle. I hold the control key down and click, and it adds an extra point
I
that
see.
I can then
Okay.
manipulate. So control to add and or to remove. So if I hold the control and click on an existing point, it removes it. And then the space bar changes it to a dash point, and you can see how the points shift, all the gaps shift when I do that.
I don't know that, but I do that all the time for fences.
The fences, form lines, you can use it for trails too. So you've got a trail, like a mountain bike trail that's got a lot of bends in it, or if you've got like a trail junction and you specifically want a dash where the junction is, you can use it there too.
To know.
So not necessarily a question, but something that's helped me a lot doing this is changing the opacity of the background map. So I could actually tell what I was drawing versus what I was seeing. So people
Yeah.
it may help people.
Change that, or you can also change the opacity of the map. But yeah, the background map one is a good comment there. Elizabeth, are you there? How is this contour drawing feeling for you?
Yeah, hi Joe.
Hey,
I think it's okay.
good.
I need more practice.
Yes, it's all about practice.
Yeah.
It's there's the actual like, what do I draw? But then there's the how do I actually draw it, and that's without knowing how to draw it, you're not going to get very far. So
Yeah, exactly.
So Jeff, I use my freedom to look it up.
okay,
Form line is the dashes are every 30 meters, and it's a 3-meter gap real world, right? So 33 meters is in theory your shortest form line.
yeah,
Two brown lines and a dash in between.
Where are you reading that?
It's deep in the IOF specifications. You can also extrapolate by just drawing some on your screen and watching how and when it automatically jumps between, for instance, 4 brown lines and 5 brown lines, and at what distances.
If you right click on this symbol and edit it, no, it does not. Okay. So depending on how the file is created, the symbol sets that come with Open Orienteering Mapper do have the definitions in them. Like the written definition, or you can find it in the line settings as well. So 3 millimeters and 0.3 millimeters here in Open Orienteering Mapper. That's at this is a 1 to 10,000 based map file. So that adds up to what John was saying.
Does anybody have a quick link to the latest version of those specifications?
I can put one in the chat for you, Ralph.
Okay, thanks.
I wouldn't exactly call it comedy, but it seems a little comical that, you know, we have this process that we're going through learning right now that is art at some level.
Yeah.
Like, significantly like interpretive and then we have like standards that are very rigorous and you're like, oh yeah, but I don't actually do that, even though that's what it says to do.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a specification / standard, but there also has to be a lot of room for interpreting that, because the terrain that I've got in Kingston here versus the terrain that you've got, Eric, versus the terrain in Sweden versus the terrain in Switzerland, all have to fit under that same standard, right?
Yep.
And so it's a balance. Yeah, you have to strike a balance, right? So.
And the good news is the implementers of the software, whether OCAD or OOM, they get all that stuff right in general inside the program, right? So you don't have to think about it, and it's going to draw correctly for you.
Yeah.
We can focus on being artists.
So, Ralph, I'm just going to share you, rather than like the direct link to the PDF, I'm going to share you the link to the page where you have all of the different PDFs for the different specifications.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Because they've got the forest one and the sprint one and the ski orienteering one. And also they update them periodically. So this is where you can find all
Sure.
the
Yeah.
files.
So can you put that link to that site in?
It's in the, yeah. So that's what I've just put you in the Zoom chat here.
Oh, I don't see. Oh, there it is. Okay. It's something else with covering it. Okay. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So there's a ton of information in there. You can kind of get lost in it. And as John said, in terms of like the definitions of all the symbols and stuff, trust what you get when you create your map file in Open Orienteering Mapper or OCAD. But there's a lot of additional information in there that may put you to sleep. But if you're interested, it is good information.
And I don't know what Jeff's experience is, but when you do a high level, like a WRE level map, world ranking event level map, you have to send it to someone at IOF to look under the hood of your map file. And the times I've had to do that, I never get comments back about the science of my, hey, you didn't show this precisely. The comments are always, like you said, Eric, of just like the art bit of it. Like, hey, good job. You followed the standards. Now violate them in these couple spots and show this better. That's always been the comments I get back.
Yeah, I'm doing my first project for an event at a high enough level for the North American Champs coming up, and I haven't gotten that response back yet. So it'll be interesting to see what they say. There was one other thing I was looking for in here. Oh yes, this OMAP. So you all see my web browser right now?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So this OMAP wiki is quite interesting because in addition, so they basically go through the specification. But for all the different symbols, they show so let's take this Earth Bank, for example. They break down the definition that's in the description that's in the specification, and then they give you some additional comments, and they give you some correct and incorrect examples for all of the different symbols. So you can always go through, and if you're not sure how to draw something, you can take a look at that and what that would. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so you see, here's an example of something that should be drawn as an Earth bank, right? And then I can click on the examples that should not be. And the one thing here is that I wish that in these incorrect examples that they're giving, that they would tell you how it should be mapped. They say this is the wrong way to do it, but they don't tell you what the right way to map it is. In this particular case, the right way to map this is as a cliff as opposed to an Earth bank. But anyway, this is getting off topic here, but more useful resources.
Are there similar resources on the course setting side? Not so much what are they, but if I go digging, will I find similar things?
Orienteering Canada has an officials program to certify officials, so or course planning officials, and has those resources. I don't know if Orienteering USA has something similar.
But there's not necessarily IOF standards for course setting is what I think you're saying there.
No, I'm not aware of anything at the international level, no.
Okay.
I was gonna have Cheetos. You're not gonna have Cheetos. I'm gonna have Cheetos. What? This is yours. This is yours.
All right, back to the exercise here that you guys are doing. Who has a question? I'm sure there's folks with questions.
How did you move the gap in the form line again? I know you showed that, but
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go here and let's say, okay, I find this is just too close to this bend here. So I can either take one of these points and I can hold the space bar down and change it. And by holding the space bar and clicking on the point, and it's going to say, okay, I got to force it around, or force it away from that point there. Or if I can add an extra point on this corner by holding the control key down and then the space key, click on it, and I can do the same, but with an extra point there. And so now these tags are longer. They're not going to be 30 meters in the terrain anymore. They're probably more like 40 meters now, because now it's only showing 2 gaps instead of before it was showing 3 gaps. But it's decided, oh no, I need to stretch them a little bit so that I can avoid putting a gap right in this particular spot in the middle of the line.
Got it.
So something that helps me is usually whenever you click shift or control or space at the very bottom of the screen, it tells you what, like if you press space and click what it's going to do. It kind of gives you some more options of what you can do.
Do like, no matter how loud it sound is, it have to muffle it to the same point. And they make it relative to how loud it is. So what they do with my solar compact, so even if it's quiet already, they'll make it the same amount quieter. They make it quieter than it should be.
Jim, are you there? I don't think I've heard from you at all this this evening.
I saw him briefly a few moments, maybe 20 minutes ago. Headphones and everything, but I don't know.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. How are you finding this stuff?
Not too bad.
Good.
Except, you know, I'm not fond of orienteering mapper.
Right. Right. Yes. Well, I had included a question. I know you had asked me earlier if we could do some of this in OCAD, and I put a question in there, and about half of the people said they would be using Open Orienteering Mapper. Half said they'd be using both. And but there was one person, that might have been you, Jim, that had said, "Oh, I'm going to use OCAD." So
yeah. I've got a question though. Would you go back to this? Would you go back to the map that you just have here?
okay, so if I show the background here like this,
Yep.
okay.
Okay. I can't seem to hit it, but there is there's a contour line that's a major contour line, and then in the middle of it, it's just sort of upper right, and it's not continued. You're right there.
Yeah.
So click on the part that's a regular contour line.
Okay, well, unfortunately, it's loaded as a background map, so I actually can't click on it unless I load that background map. So I can't actually select it here.
Oh, I can though, in the one that I brought up.
Okay, either you've brought up what I've got here loaded as a background map, either you've loaded that directly, or you've already traced it and you've selected it.
Okay.
But go on, what's your question?
All right, when I click on the short section that has the regular contour interval,
yeah,
I just get all squares, and I'm assuming I'm going to try it now. I go over and click on the index contour. What symbol allows me to change it from a regular contour to the index contour?
Okay, so I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to load that background file so that I can, rather than recreating this here. So I go into the exercise contour background.
Yeah.
And I load this here. So now I've got the this section in the middle. So you're going to want the change no, not that tool there, this one here, switch symbol tool. So what you need to do is click on the object, so the contour line that I want to change, then select the new symbol that I want to change it to on the right.
Yeah.
I want to change this back to an index contour. I click on the index contour, and then I click on this tool here, which is left of this yellow one.
I got it.
And you click on it and it changes. Okay, so what I would do in a case like this is I would draw it all as an index contour. And then I would cut a segment of it using the gray scissors. And then I would deselect all of that, select just this middle section, and then following that process, but in reverse here to change it, click on that middle section, select the contour, and then click here to change it over.
Yeah, that's what I did. It worked.
Okay.
The only thing is when I click on the contour, when I change it over, it's all squares.
You don't see the round, the
I
circles.
don't
with the
see any,
tags.
I don't see any round tags on any of them.
Interesting.
Why would that be?
I'm not entirely sure. Either it's not one that you've drawn in, it's one from the background. If you've drawn it in, it could be because you've drawn it the way you've drawn it. Could be the
I
answer.
didn't draw it in. I literally did the process you showed where I used that arrow and what's it say? Switch.
Right. I don't know. I don't know, Jim. There's something going on. Either it's just not displaying it properly. If you click on a different contour line, does it show it with the squares and the circles?
Yep. I went over to the one just to the right. That's the big hill
Yeah.
with the knoll, with the elongated knoll in the middle.
Yeah.
And I clicked on that index contour and I get all squares as well.
So it might just not be your screen might just not
It's okay,
be
nobody
showing it properly for some reason.
There.
I'm not sure.
Because the one I have open, it says arc tracing exercise contour background map.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I won't elaborate on that. It's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I know, Jim, you're used to working in OCAD. Have previous experience in OCAD, so all the stuff that we're doing here you can do in OCAD as well.
Yes, you can. It just looks different.
Yeah, exactly. I prefer the user interface in Open Orienteering Mapper. I know many people do, but if OCAD works for you and that's what you want to work in, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And it's just to the point that I don't want to learn 2 mapping programs because
Right.
one's enough to learn.
Sure, fair enough. Thanks, John. John was just sharing in the chat if anyone wants. There's a link to a page on the Open Orienteering website that shows all the keyboard shortcuts.
Particularly if you find yourself going back and forth on your screen a lot over to like the edit points cursor and then back to the draw cursor. There's keyboard shortcuts so you can leave your mouse in one spot and just switch between cursor types.
Yeah. You can also do a right click and it pulls up this other version of this menu that has some of the tools. So that's another way to do it. I'm in the process of transitioning to using the keyboard shortcuts more, but I still find myself from habit going like back up to the menu at the top. And it is slower. It does take time to drag the mouse around. All right, let's leave this particular exercise here. I want to kind of go to the next step of this, which is to trace from LiDAR. So we're not going to do any kind of interpreting of LiDAR, but we are going to trace rather than an existing map that I've already drawn or somebody else has already drawn. We're going to work from LiDAR. So this time you're going to open the Kokanee Creek PP exercise, Kokanee Creek Provincial Park in BC. And you're going to open not the dash LiDAR file. So just the Kokanee Creek PP exercise, you're going to open that up. And you're going to get a file that looks like this. So this is a bottom of a mountain. And so there's a lot of more or less parallel contours that you're going to be drawing. So I've chosen this particular area on purpose because there's not going to be too much manipulation to do, or interpretation, I should say, to do relative to the LiDAR contours. And so for the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to be drawing, but instead of tracing exactly a shape, you're going to kind of follow these thicker red lines. And you don't need to be super, super exact. There's all these tiny little squiggles that are hopefully doesn't need saying that that those are kind of extraneous level of detail. And you're going to go along and draw your contour in there. And basically, more or less, you should be covering up the thicker red lines for this particular one. And again, I don't remember who had mentioned this. Andrew maybe had mentioned the idea of changing your opacity. So you can change the opacity of your red lines. But what I would actually do here is I would change the opacity of the map layer. So in your templates, you see, if you open up the templates through F9 or the menu templates, template setup window, or the menu icon there, you'll get a map and then your two background layers, and change it to say 60% on the map layer, the top one. And then you can see your red lines through your brown contours. So this is kind of the next step in our progression towards drawing your contours and interpreting where you want to draw them. So we've got another 20 minutes or so, and I'll leave you all to work on that. And again, questions, discussion, happy to have that as we go along.
Jeff?
Yes, Jim?
Yes, Jim. I've got the Kokanee, it literally says Kokanee Creek PP exercise OMAP,
Yep.
Open Orienteer Mapper 0.9.5.
Yep.
And then at the top it says Provincial Park. And then it says trace a 5-meter LiDAR contours, exactly the text you have there.
Yep.
I have the trails and everything in, but I don't have any of the background.
Okay, so do you see this window in the bottom right that I see here where I see my templates, hide all templates? Do you have that?
No, it doesn't show up at all. I
Okay,
haven't
so-
been able to get that akin.
So do you see where my mouse is in the top middle of my screen?
Yep.
See that icon? Click on that icon.
Okay.
And what do you see? What do you see on the right?
That template still didn't come in. I just have the symbol set on the right-hand side.
Do you see this? Do you see this window here? This, and it just is empty.
Nope.
So did you click on this? Maybe click on this icon again and see if you get that window showing up on the bottom.
I had. All right, I got it now.
And what do you see? What do you see a list there? What does it show?
It did come in. Just a minute. Okay. The bottom one where it says Kokanee Creek Provincial Park merged PNG.
Yeah.
It's in red. Yours is in black.
Do you see the one above it? That's in like this exercise LiDAR one?
Yeah, and I got the opacity, I've got the map, and I've got the LiDAR OMAP. And
And so-
all three are checked just like yours.
Okay. But they're
And the bottom one is, but the bottom one's in red, but I still don't have,
not this middle one.
I have that.
The middle one's in black. Do you see do you see the red contour lines? Or not?
No,
No, you
no,
don't.
they're not on the map.
So two options. So either you've got this hide all templates checked at the top,
Okay,
in which case click that, unclick that, and do you see the red contour lines now?
nope.
Okay, so the other option, I would expect this to be showing in red, this middle Kokanee Creek PP exercise dash LiDAR to be showing in red if this is the case. But the other option is that it can't find that file either because you did not download it or you placed it in a different folder.
Oh,
So this needs to be downloaded from Google Drive and placed in the same folder as the other file that you've opened.
I thought I did, but I know exactly what you mean. All right, I'll go look.
Give that a try.
Jeff,
Yep.
I have a question. In like other software I've used before, like even if you think of Word, right, and you want to change a font, you can
Yep.
select a font and then the entire font changes. With this, why can't we just select a section of this red line and change it entirely to an evened out contour line? Or can we, and you're teaching us a different thing?
So there
I
would
don't know.
Yeah, so there would be a way to do that. Where you can, but it's because the method that I'm showing you is I brought it in as a background map, and we're explicitly going through a process of tracing over top of it. And so if I had this brought in as the main map, yes, I could go in and click one and I could change the symbol to the brown, but then I'd have to change it, draw it, re-smooth it. So this way I don't have them all in there and I'm having to change and then keep track of which ones I've changed. I'm just drawing over top and I can go through and if there's no brown line there, then I haven't done it and I haven't drawn it and I haven't smoothed it out yet.
Okay, so this question will reflect my very beginning level of orienteering, right?
Okay.
Why isn't it just acceptable to orienteer off this map as it is? I understand because I've been listening to you about the runnability and the route choice and all of that, but
Yep.
it seems to me like the sport itself isn't about picking a map and then being able to do that in your head. So if this is off base, like this question we could discuss another time, but I'm finding there's a big gap for me in these classes between what we're starting with and what our end goal is. I've seen them, not to do with your explanation, but more just my understanding of the principles behind it.
Right.
Yeah, like why don't we print a map and then everyone gets a map and then we run around on it, and on top of that map a route has been, like, some control points have been placed.
Yeah, so we do that essentially, right? But before that is that the map has to be made to that orienteering standard, right? And so sure, I could print this out as it is.
Yeah, standards. I forgot about that.
Right. And I
Okay.
could run on it as it is, but there's going to be some issues with it, right? I mean, for one, if we look at this as it is here, you look at this stream, which is just pulled from OpenStreetMap and put over top of the LiDAR. Well, you can see that it's going up this re-entered, and then all of a sudden it's going off, and it's going up the spur. The stream is not going to be going up the spur.
Okay, so here's the other thing is I understand that would, okay, but what about just maps that we see, OSGS maps? Like my familiarity with maps is just the ones that you buy. So they've been created in this way, I guess. We wouldn't just buy a regional map. Okay, I should just talk to you later.
I mean, yes, absolutely happy to have this conversation in more depth, but yeah, I think you'd have to really go out and kind of go out and do back to back with an orienteering map, and then with the USGS map or the standard topo map or some other map, and experience both, and you'll really quickly understand where the quality difference comes in and why it's worth taking the time to do all this work that we're doing, to draw all these contours, add in all these, do all the field work, add in all these extra features. I think if you were to experience the two back to back, it would become pretty apparent pretty quickly.
Okay, and I think also your point about the standards and making it a sport itself like that. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because otherwise you go to the world champs and somebody's run on it on a map that is used, like they're used to this particular mapping style, and then but I go over to Sweden and I'm used to something different. Well, that's not a fair competition anymore, right?
Yeah, I get, yeah. I'm gonna actually you know, blast this place, and I have to go actually early, so I'm afraid that's my terrible contribution to the to this class, but I'll see you next week.
Okay, sounds good. No,
Okay.
it's an interesting comment, and I certainly understand, knowing your background a little bit, I can understand where these questions are coming from. So
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
yeah, see ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Jeff, I got a question for you.
Sure.
I'm tracing these lines and I can, we got to smooth them out because a lot of these red lines or pink lines have a lot of jaggedy edges on them, right?
Yeah.
And so at what point do you smooth it and what point do you follow it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is there a way of like, I imagine that some of these little bumps are like, 10 centimeters or something like that. So that you would smooth out, but maybe it's like a meter or 2 meters or something, and that you want to keep. So like, how do I know when to make it, to just ignore the bumps and make it smooth or follow it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this question of yours, Andrew, is at the heart of why we have a 12-hour session on this process. This practice. I told you guys at the beginning that it wasn't a process. And yes, learning when you decide. So here, to pick an egregious example here, if I were to continue this contour line here, I obviously don't want to just kind of smooth out this particular piece here, right? This is ridiculously off of that red line, right? Versus this tiny little bump here beside the trail is on the other end. I think everybody can pretty clearly decide, yeah, I can just smooth over that one, right? Where do you draw the line in between? And this is where experience comes into play. As a general rule, you want you don't want to be drawing something that's like less than like a meter deep or high or something like that is at the bare minimum. And so if that bump is reflected in this case, I've got 50 centimeter or half meter contours in between. So every thicker line is 5, and then I've got alternating lighter pink colors every 50 centimeters. So if there's another 2 lines beside it, particularly on either side, then that might be reflective of a shape that you want to see in the in your actual final orienteering map. And then it depends on the depth of it and what else you see there. So here I've this one is maybe a good example of, do I want to draw this or not? And I'm just going to draw it in, but I've got it, and I'm just accentuating it a little bit here. It's still pretty subtle, but there is a little something there, right? I see a shape there, but I could also kind of zoom out and pretty much ignore it because it's a pretty subtle shape, right? And so the bigger it is, the bigger you're going to draw it and maybe exaggerate it even. And then it's not a do I draw it or not, but it's more of a continuum there of how much do I show it? How much do I exaggerate or stretch this feature, or how much do I cut it off or follow it exactly, right? So this one here, I'm gonna bring this back, and it's pretty little. And then this is also where if you're taking the time to create as good a quality map as you can, and you're going to go and do the field work, I might get out into the field and I might change my mind and say, oh, I really want to stretch this, or oh, I drew this, but it's not as obvious in the terrain as I thought it would be, and so I'm going to smooth this contour line out. And this is where the field work process can come into even drawing these contours.
Jeff.
Yeah.
You also my feeling is that perhaps these exercises are really us working on a certain part of the process in isolation.
Yes.
Whereas imagine that when you're drawing these contours, you wouldn't just be pulling in these pink lines that you generated from LiDAR. You might also have the hill shading and other things. Like
Yeah.
for me, yeah, I've never made a map with my own hand-drawn contours, but I would picture myself relying on those other pieces of information a lot for making some of those calls.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm wanting to isolate the kind of the practice with the Bezier curve drawing tool. And so this is why I've set these exercises up purposefully. They're a little bit more abstract because I'm really wanting to focus on the skill side of it. And we'll separate out the interpretation side next week. Just to help kind of break it down so that we're not doing too much at once.
I'll jump in if I can to reinforce something Jeff said about, he mentioned sort of at this level, these are what, 0.5 meter is every one of these really thin pink lines. And he said about 4 of them, right? A meter on either side. That's the rule of thumb I usually use also, right? If I'm seeing, I typically in steep terrain like this, pull up 1 meter cheater contours. These are 0.5 meter cheater contours. And if I see it in 3 lines, then it's something that's out there for sure, right? A little re-entrant, little spur. And the other thing I wanted to point out is this false color. It's really helpful to keep a standard set of false colors. Mine is, I use blue false color contours for 1 meters. And if I do quarter or third meter, or I will do black. And if I do something else, I would choose another color like this, pink, because it really, you notice in this exercise, it's so much easier to see your brown line versus the background. And those other examples where the background map, the template, was also brown, it gets really hard to tell brown versus whatever. So standard colors really help.
Yeah, and I'm going to build on that and reinforce what I was talking about in our LiDAR class of pick your I like that term, your false color contours. Pick your color scheme and stick to it for every map that you do. Don't change it from blue on this map to red on the next map to green on the next map, because your brain has to reinterpret what that color scheme is. And it particularly comes into play when you're looking at like the vegetation height maps and the different hill shades and all of that. And you start to intuitively know that a certain color means a certain thing. And when you start to mess with that, you have to rewire the connection between what is that color showing and what does that mean in terms of what I'm going to expect to see in the terrain, right?
So on this map that we've got up, what are the 5 meter intervals? Is it the thicker lines are the 5 meter?
The thicker lines are the 5 meter interval, yeah.
And I haven't counted. What are those in the middle then?
They're 0.5 meter.
0.5 meter.
There's
Okay.
There's 10. Well, no, I guess there's 9 lines in between.
Right. So when you're first bringing in the LiDAR,
yeah,
like you can select what contours are being displayed in the LiDAR image, right? Yeah. So I'm imagining, not having done it in this, this may be old hat, or I'm going over old ground that you already talked about, but
no, that's fine.
It's just dawning on me now.
Sure.
The question. So when you're bringing in the LiDAR, do you bring it in? It would seem to me to be better to bring it in like this, so you could get a better idea of, or it would hint at some features that you wanted to do. And
exactly.
Then
yeah.
Right. Okay.
So there might be something in between here. I don't know if this particular piece has a good example of it. Yeah, this is not the best example for this particular for what I'm wanting to show here, but there might be something small that's only like 1 meter high.
Yeah.
Or 1.5 meters high in between my 5 meter contours, and I'm going to see that in these 0.5 meter. So I'll see like 3 0.5 meter something, well, I did see one quick example here, for example, right? So this here is a meter and a bit, basically a meter and a half from this edge, or a meter,
Yeah.
right? So there's something there. So maybe I'll put a knoll in here. And if I didn't draw these little contours in between, I wouldn't necessarily see that high point.
And the thickness of the line that you're drawing from all orienteering mapper, that's the thickness it's going to be on the final map, is
The
it?
brown is, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Because it
this
seems
here-
awfully hard to work with that level of thickness at this sort of the scale.
Right.
Right, and it gets harder when you switch to the index contours, right? Because they're even thicker.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a way to do it with finer lines in the initial stage and this with one click, say?
And then, I mean, you can cheat. I would not recommend it. I would suggest that you get used to it.
Okay.
Because I can see why you say it's hard, but at the same time, if I've got a thinner line, it's more tempting to draw in more curves,
Yeah, that's true too.
right?
Yeah.
And so by seeing it as it will look in the final product, you're able to draw with the final product in mind,
Right. Right.
right? And this is where the art of it comes in, is that I'm not creating a mathematically correct map here. I'm creating a printed product that is going to be usable by the orienteer. And so I want to think, as I'm creating this, I want to think about what they're going to see at the final end, at the final.
Yeah, it's got a specific purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
On that LiDAR, there's a little brown sort of on the image you had just
Like right here?
Yeah, what is that? Is
So
that something you drew in, or?
when I created these contours from the LiDAR, there's a setting there that you can set to draw negative contours as well as positive contours. And
Oh
I
yeah, I
have them
remember.
here.
Yeah.
And so this is the negative contours. And so if this was just red, I wouldn't know if this was a depression or a
Right.
knoll. And so the orange is showing that it's a depression.
Right. Okay.
So this isn't the greatest map. It's almost all red because it's just a single slope, but there are a few little examples of that. There's one there. There's a couple of orange ones in here. Showing a little, I guess, a little pool. There's probably a stream that comes down there. So we're basically at our 3 hours here. I don't know about you guys, but that went by really quickly for in my mind. So I hope that was helpful for everybody. I'm happy to stay on for an extra couple of minutes here if anyone has any last questions. But otherwise we'll come back to this again in a week, and we will start getting into the actual interpretation of the data and how do you interpret and make decisions about where you're drawing your contours and how you're drawing them. I encourage you to, if you're not comfortable with it enough already, to do some of these, to keep practicing using the various example files that I've shared. And yeah, I can't, spend hours with each of you, but if you do have questions in the next week, please do reach out. Because the last thing I want is for you guys to, have trouble with getting something set up or be stuck on something like that and not be able to practice, or I want you to get the most out of it. So if you have questions, please let me know.
Alrighty. Thanks very much. That was helpful.
Good stuff. Glad to hear it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
See you all next week.
You're welcome, all.
Thanks.
Jeff,
See ya.
I have a question. It's
Sure.
Jim. Actually, I want you to use that very file that you have up right now.
Okay.
And if you would zoom in to that contour, that partial contour you've got drawn.
The one I've drawn? Yeah.
Yep, and if you can enlarge it, there, okay. My first question is, you know how it ends? Then if you start drawing another one, I
Yep.
tried doing that and it became separate. Now, in the OCAD, I can join them. I don't know how to join them to make them one. In other words, the contour of the same line. Because when I started drawing it and then you click on the previous one, it only shows it to that far. So I don't know how to make it connect up.
So you can do that by holding the shift key down. When you
Oh,
start
just the shift
new
key.
line. Yeah.
Okay. That does that. All right. The next part is scroll over to the right of the same
To the
one.
right. Like anywhere on here, or do you want to go to
No, keep going right to the
end of
other
it?
end of
Yep.
that line. Okay. What I was finding is, all right, so you're going to press shift and then continue to draw.
Yep.
I found what happens was when I got to the end of my screen, I couldn't keep it going and I had to start again. How do you keep it going so you don't lose it even though you're at the end of the screen? Again, because in OCAD, it picks it up, it understands that you're at the edge and then it keeps going.
Why is my mouse doing funny things here? So okay, my mouse is not drawing my curve properly for some reason right now. So you can, so if you switch tools, it's going to stop. There might be, actually, I think there's two ways of doing this. So if you've got the middle, like the zoom wheel, and you hold that button down, that switches to pan, and you can do that, and then you can continue drawing. So
Okay.
pan, I'm holding that middle button down and click and dragging over. Or sometimes I'll use that as a scroll wheel to zoom out and then zoom back in. And
Yeah.
I can kind of move around that way and continue drawing that way.
Okay. Thank you. My next question has to do with what we were talking about before.
Okay.
I can bring in that LiDAR file. I just can't get the trails in. In other words, the other piece of data, like the power lines, your northing lines, and the trails, I can't get them to come in. I just get the raw LiDAR map, and I can
Okay, so
draw on
you're
that.
yeah, so
But
you're
I still
opening
can't get that frame right there.
yeah, so the trails, the stream, the power lines are all in my main map file. And I think what you're
Yep.
doing is you're opening your LiDAR file as the main file and not as a template file or a background map file. So you
I
still
had
want
to
to be
do that because the other
opening
one,
the exercise file.
yeah, that one wouldn't. I keep bringing that one in, but I still can't get the contours to come in, even though I've got it in the same file folder.
Okay, so I'm not sure what happened here. So try removing. So in this template window that I've got on my right,
Yep.
try removing using the see where my mouse is. There's a red minus button here.
Yep.
Click on that and then green and open a template and then open that template again.
Oh, okay. I'll try
So
that.
you're gonna add your template layers just like you would do in OCAD. It's a slightly like they use some slightly different terminology and obviously the layout is different. But that's how you can add in the background.
Okay. I'll try that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
no
Good
worries.
night. Thanks very much.
Okay. See you later, Jim.
Yep.
You're welcome, Elizabeth.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks.
Yeah, good night all.
Sorry, I was busy drawing and not paying attention. Everybody left. Bye.
Everyone but you and John. See you, Eric.
See you later.
Hey, Jeff, that was very good. I'll keep feedback brief. My guess is we would have benefited from a review up front of this is opening a file versus I think a lot of people tried to import and And then
Yeah.
I don't know, to clean up some of the people were opening, they just looked for the first word in a map file name and went with it, and maybe just name the other ones nonsensical stuff so they're not
Yeah.
tempted to open them.
Apparently, this is not straightforward enough for everybody.
At one point I had to mute and turn off my video, and I went over to Anna. We're in a hotel room, and I'm like, Anna, oh my God, he's teaching 70-year-olds how to click and drag.
I know. Thankfully, I think it worked out enough that like the folks that knew what they were doing were able to just dive in and practice.
Yes. Yeah.
But I've done.
It's
one of my-
unfortunate that the other Wednesdays I can't be here the whole time because Jim's case, who's already an avid OCAD user, it would almost make sense to send him to a breakout room with me because he can do all this stuff and more in OCAD.
For sure.
But
yeah,
whatever.
I said that little question beforehand saying, okay, what are people going to use? And the overwhelming majority was this because it's free, right? Most people are not going to pay $200 a year or whatever it is now to make one park map every year, right? Like it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. There were a couple sniffing around at, hey, there has to be, when you're just manually tracing, there has to be a better way. Or there's got to be a better way to smooth. Yes, right. But you've got to pull it into, QGIS or something. And then the learning curve is, and then you're going to have 22 different ways to smooth it.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And whatever.
I
But
mean,
the learning
you can do
curve to
some
that is
basic smoothing in Open Orienteering Mapper.
I did that while you were talking. I went and opened a file and I was gonna show everyone, hey, I just used Open Orienteering Mapper's simplify path followed by smooth, and this is what you get. Yes, it did a lot of it, but there's still so many errors, and because there's no redraw tool, fixing those errors is incredibly painful.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're all the way back to you're better off tracing it.
Exactly. I mean, this is one example where I think your process of pulling in the KP contours and then just making adjustments makes all sorts of sense on a map like this.
Yes.
Right? Like it's a waste of time to try to draw them all. But on some of these other map samples that I showed where there's a ton of little knolls and things, and I'm having to I'm shifting things like 2.5 meters up and down and stretching things. And in those cases, it's not actually more efficient. Right. And so that's where I come at this process from, is that's my natural home terrain, is this like complex stuff at like multiple levels. And you've got things that are like shifted up to 2 meters and these, 1.5 meter hills that you've got to draw. And so there's no benefit to starting from something that is, you're going to have to delete half of it anyway.
Right. And if you spent time teaching people to click and drag, imagine teaching people to use KP when you're in the DOS command line.
I
Good
know.
luck with that.
I know. I did my last course, the LiDAR one that I did over the last couple of weeks, and I'm doing it in OCAD, right? No, it's not free, and I'd love a free tool. It's like, yeah, but we'd be here for like 6 hours just trying to get you through like how to even run this thing, right?
Oh, you froze your back. All right, I'll let you get going. You've had a long night.
Yeah, it's 9 o'clock for me. What is it? It's 2 hours difference for you in Arizona?
Yeah, I'm 2 hours back until this weekend, I guess. And then I'm 3 hours back. Arizona doesn't move.
Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. So then you'll be kind of joining in for like the first little bit of the next couple of weeks.
Yes. And I got to show you one picture of where I came in a couple minutes late because I was checking an area Christina wants to use.
Yeah.
And it was fantabulous. Let me see here. Share screen. I want to share this one, maybe. No.
Okay, I'm just seeing it
Yeah,
at the Powerball
that's not
lottery.
the right one. It popped up with an advertisement, and so I was using someone else's picture. So
Right.
anyway, it was fantastic boulders, cliffs,
Oh, nice.
really cool area.
Nice, nice.
So I came in with a smile. It's
Cool.
good class. All right.
Good stuff.
Good night.
All right, talk later, John.